Before you scroll away, let me ask you something. When was the last time you truly rested? Not just closed your eyes, but actually let your mind stop racing, stop planning, stop worrying about tomorrow. If you can't remember, then you're exactly where you need to be. This isn't just another video. This is permission to finally let go. Stay with me for just a few minutes. I think you'll be surprised how quickly the weight starts to lift. Good evening and welcome to Embers and Pages, where we retell the world's most beautiful stories in a voice meant for rest. How are you feeling tonight? Perhaps you've spent the day navigating expectations, obligations, the quiet compromises we make to belong. If so, you've come to the right place. Here we soften, we reflect, we find beauty in what was and peace in what might have been. If this is your first time with us, welcome. If you've returned, thank you for trusting this space again. A gentle thought before we begin. If tonight's story brings you comfort, consider leaving a like, sharing it with someone who needs stillness, or letting us know in the comments which classic you'd like us to visit next. Every listener here becomes part of something quiet and good. Tonight, we enter the glittering, coded world of 1870s New York, guided by Edith Wharton's 1920 masterpiece, The Age of Innocence. This is a story of drawing rooms and opera boxes, of unspoken rules and silent sacrifices. It follows Newland Archer, a man born into privilege and propriety, who finds himself caught between the woman he's meant to marry and the woman who awakens something deeper in his soul. It is a tale of restrained passion, duty honored at great cost, and the bittersweet wisdom of looking back across the years at a road not taken. Before we step into that vanished world, let's settle in. Dim the lights until the room feels like dusk. Lower the volume so my voice is barely louder than your breath. This helps the mind release its grip. Lie down in your most comfortable position. Let your shoulders drop, your jaw unclench, your body become heavy against the sheets. Close your eyes if that feels right. Breathe slowly, deeply, as if drawing in the scent of old gardens and gaslight. There's nothing you need to do now. Nothing to solve, just listen and let go. You don't need to hear every word. You don't need to stay awake until the end. If you drift into sleep halfway through a sentence, halfway through a scene, that is exactly as it should be. This story will wait. It has waited over a century already. But tonight, your rest comes first. Our story opens on a January evening in the Academy of Music, where the finest families of New York society gather to see and be seen. There, in a dimmed box overlooking the stage, sits Newland Archer, a young lawyer of impeccable breeding, newly engaged to the lovely May Welland. He should be content, he should be certain. But tonight, as the curtain rises on an opera about doomed love, a quiet unease stirs in his chest. And across the theater, in another box, a woman has just arrived from Europe, a woman who will change everything he thought he understood about honor, happiness, and the price of living by the rules. The chandeliers glow soft against red velvet, the orchestra swells, and in that gilded room, Newland Archer begins to sense, though he does not yet know it, that innocence once lost is never quite regained. The Academy of Music stood on 14th Street like a temple to beauty and exclusivity. Its red and gold interior glowed under the chandeliers, and in the horseshoe of boxes sat New York's finest families, dressed in their evening best. The women wore silks that rustled like whispered secrets. The men stood in black tailcoats, formal as sentinels. This was January 1870, and in this room, everyone knew their place. Newland Archer sat in his family's box, watching the stage but not quite seeing it. He was 27, a lawyer by profession, polished by education and breeding. His dark hair was parted neatly, his collar was starched. His cufflinks gleamed. To look at him was to see a man who belonged, utterly and without question, to this world of inherited wealth, unspoken codes, and rigid propriety. On the stage, Christine Nilsson sang the role of Marguerite in Faust, her voice soaring over the orchestra. The audience barely listened. Opera was not about music here. It was about appearing, about being seen in the right box at the right moment, about the careful choreography of social position. Newland knew this. He had been raised to know it, the way one knows to breathe. And yet tonight, something felt different. Tonight, he kept glancing across the theater to the box where May Welland sat with her family. May, his fiancée. Beautiful, composed, dressed in white as always, her blonde hair arranged in perfect curls. She was everything a young woman of her class should be: innocent, sweet, obedient, lovely. Their engagement had been announced just weeks ago, and already the wedding plans were in motion. It was, everyone agreed, an ideal match. Newland felt a flicker of pride as he looked at her. She was so pure, so untouched by anything ugly or complicated. She reminded him of a flower kept under glass, protected from weather and time. He would be a good husband to her. He would provide, protect, guide. She would make their home a place of grace and calm. Together they would host dinners, attend the right gatherings, raise their children to carry on the same traditions. It was the life he had always expected to live. Why then did he feel this faint restlessness, this barely perceptible sense of something missing? He shook the thought away. It was merely pre-wedding nerves, he told himself. Everyone felt them. Marriage was a significant step after all. It was natural to feel a moment of hesitation before committing oneself entirely to another person, to a particular future. But May was perfect for him. Everyone said so. His mother approved. His friends congratulated him. The match made sense in every conceivable way. During the intermission, murmurs spread through the boxes like wind through tall grass. There was talk of someone new in town, someone who had caused a small scandal just by appearing tonight. Newland's mother leaned close to him, her fan fluttering with agitation. "Did you see?" she whispered, her voice tight with disapproval and fascination. "Ellen Olenska is here, in the Mingot box, with May." He followed her gaze. There beside May sat a woman Newland had not seen in years, Countess Ellen Olenska, May's cousin. She had left New York as a young girl to marry a Polish count, a man of title, but it was whispered, questionable character, and even more questionable morals. The marriage had been unhappy. Rumors had drifted back across the Atlantic over the years, stories of the Count's cruelty, his infidelities, his dissolute friends. And now, after nearly a decade abroad, Ellen had returned, alone. Without her husband, the implications were extraordinary. Newland studied her from across the theater. She was not dressed like the other women. While they wore pale pastels and modest necklines, their jewelry discreet, their hair arranged in the current fashion, Ellen's gown was a deep, rich color cut in the European fashion, daringly low at the shoulder. Her dark hair was arranged loosely, almost carelessly, with none of the elaborate curls and pins the other ladies favored. She did not hold herself with the stiff formality of society women. She leaned forward, watched the stage with genuine interest, laughed openly at something May said. She seemed unaware that people were staring, or perhaps she was aware and simply did not care. That possibility was almost more shocking than anything else. Newland's mother sighed, a sound heavy with meaning. "Poor thing, she's left her husband, you know, separated. It's quite unfortunate." The word unfortunate carried the weight of 1,000 judgments. In their world, separation was a scandal. Divorce was unthinkable, a word spoken only in hushed tones, if at all. A woman who left her husband, no matter the cause, no matter the provocation, was marked. Society could be kind to her, out of pity or family loyalty, but she would always carry the taint of impropriety. She had broken the unspoken contract. Ellen Olenska had broken the rules, even if only by running away from a bad situation. "She shouldn't have come tonight," Newland's sister Janie murmured, peering through her opera glasses. "Not to the opera, not so publicly, in old Mrs. Mingot's box where everyone can see. People will talk, people are already talking," their mother replied dryly. Newland said nothing. He watched Ellen lift her opera glasses to study the stage, watched the light from the chandeliers catch her profile, strong, intelligent, alive with some quality he struggled to name. There was something about her, a presence, a kind of self-possession, that felt almost foreign here, in this room of carefully controlled appearances and rehearsed gestures. The second act began. The singers returned to the stage, their voices rising in passion and despair. Faust sold his soul for youth and love. Marguerite was betrayed. The familiar story unfolded, beautiful and tragic. Newland tried to focus on the music, but his thoughts kept drifting. He thought of May, so young and sheltering in her innocence, knowing nothing of the world beyond these gilded rooms and summer estates. And then he thought of Ellen, who had seen Europe, who had lived in palaces and suffered God knew what indignities, who had somehow escaped and made her way back here. The contrast was striking, unsettling. After the opera ended, as the audience rose in a rustling wave of silk and conversation, Newland made his way to the Mingot box to pay his respects. It was expected of him, as May's fiancé, to greet her family. Old Mrs. Mingot, May's grandmother and the formidable matriarch of the family, sat like a queen on her throne, vast in her velvet gown, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. She greeted him with a knowing smile. "Ah, Newland. Come to see your bride, I expect. And quite right, too. A man should be attentive in these early days of engagement, sets the tone for everything that follows." May blushed prettily and extended her gloved hand. He kissed it, feeling the expected warmth of affection, the comfortable rightness of the gesture. She smiled up at him with such trust, such uncomplicated happiness, that he felt a pang of tenderness. She was dear to him, she truly was. And then Mrs. Mingot gestured broadly to Ellen, who stood slightly apart, as if uncertain of her place. "You remember my granddaughter, Ellen, don't you? Though I suppose she's Countess Olenska now." Or was. The old woman's eyes gleamed with mischief and defiance. She had always enjoyed needling society's conventions. Her wealth and position gave her the freedom to do so. "She's come back to us. And we're keeping her." The declaration was unmistakable. Mrs. Mingot was claiming Ellen, protecting her, daring anyone to challenge the decision. Ellen turned to face Newland, and for the first time he saw her up close. Her eyes were dark and clear, filled with intelligence and something else, experience perhaps. A kind of knowledge that came from having lived beyond the narrow confines of this small, insulated world. There was sadness there too, he thought, carefully hidden but present nonetheless. "Mr. Archer," she said, her voice warm and slightly accented from years abroad. The European inflection gave her words a different music. "How kind of you to come and say hello. I'm afraid I've caused a bit of a stir tonight. I seem to have forgotten how to behave properly in New York." "Not at all," Newland replied, though they both knew it was a polite lie. The stir was undeniable. Half the theater was still glancing in their direction. She smiled, a real smile, not the practiced curve of lips he was used to seeing. It transformed her face, made her suddenly younger, more vulnerable. "You're generous, but I've been away long enough to forget the rules, I think. Or perhaps I've simply seen too many different rules in too many different places, and now I can't remember which ones apply where. I'll have to relearn how to be a New Yorker. Perhaps," he said carefully, surprising himself, "the rules aren't as important as the people." Ellen looked at him with open curiosity, as if he had said something unexpected and interesting, as if he were not merely reciting the expected pleasantries. May, standing beside them, looked from one to the other with her sweet, slightly puzzled expression, not quite understanding what had passed between them, but sensing something. "Newland is always so gallant," May said softly, with innocent pride in her fiancé. The moment passed. Newland bowed and excused himself, but as he walked away through the crowded lobby, past clusters of gossiping matrons and groups of young men in evening dress, he felt the lingering impression of Ellen's gaze, as though she had seen something in him he had not known was visible. As though in that brief exchange she had recognized a kindred spirit, someone who also, perhaps, questioned the gilded cage they all inhabited. Outside, carriages lined the street, their lamps glowing softly in the winter darkness. Snow had begun to fall, light and dry, dusting the shoulders of men's coats and the horses' manets. Newland climbed into his own carriage and settled back against the velvet seat, pulling the fur blanket over his knees. The horses' hooves clattered over the cobblestones, carrying him home through the cold night, through streets quiet and elegant, lined with the mansions of families he had known all his life. He thought of his life stretching ahead, predictable, respectable, secure, marriage to May, a successful law practice. Children, summers in Newport, winters in town, the same dinners, the same faces, the same conversations year after year. Generations of Archers before him had lived this way, and it had been enough for them. It would be enough for him too, wouldn't it? The thought lingered, unanswered, as the carriage rolled through the empty streets, past the darkened windows of the city's great houses, where other lives unfolded behind thick curtains and closed doors. And somewhere in one of those houses, Ellen Olenska was perhaps looking out at the same winter sky, the same falling snow, thinking thoughts he could not imagine, shaped by a world he had never seen, carrying sorrows he could not fathom. He did not yet know how much that world, and that woman, would come to matter. He did not yet know that this night at the opera, this moment of meeting, was the beginning of everything. In the days that followed the opera, Ellen Olenska's name was on everyone's lips. In drawing rooms and over tea tables, behind gloved hands and polite smiles, the ladies of New York society discussed her return with a mixture of sympathy and suspicion. What had really happened in Europe? Why had she left her husband? Had she been mistreated, or had she simply tired of marriage? And most importantly, what did she intend to do now? Would she seek a divorce? The very word was scandalous, almost unspeakable. Newland heard the whispers at his club, in his office, at family dinners. His mother and sister were particularly fascinated by the Ellen question, as they called it. They pitied her, certainly, but they were also wary. A woman who had broken with convention, even for good reasons, was dangerous. She carried a kind of contagion. If one rule could be broken, others might follow. Someone should speak to her, his mother said one evening over dinner. Someone she trusts, perhaps you, Newland. You're to be part of the family soon, and you have a level head. She respects the law. She might listen to you. Newland felt a strange flutter of anticipation at the thought of calling on Ellen. He told himself it was simply duty. May's family was now his family. Ellen was May's cousin. It was appropriate for him to welcome her home, to offer whatever counsel might be useful. But beneath that rationalization was something less easily named, a curiosity, a pull toward the woman who seemed so different from everyone else he knew. He called on Ellen a few days later, in the late afternoon, when the winter sun slanted low through the windows of the small house old Mrs. Mingot had lent her. It was not in the fashionable part of town. It was west, near the docks, in a neighborhood where artists and immigrants lived, where rents were cheap and conventions looser. The house itself was charming in an unconventional way, narrow, painted a cheerful yellow, with window boxes that would hold flowers in spring. A maid showed him into the parlor, and after a few moments, Ellen appeared. She was dressed simply, in a dark dress with none of the elaborate trimmings fashionable women wore. Her hair was loose, held back with a simple ribbon. She looked younger than she had at the opera, less guarded. "Mr. Archer," she said, smiling with what seemed like genuine pleasure. "How kind of you to call. Please sit. Would you like tea?" "Thank you, yes," he said, settling into a chair near the fire. The room was warm and cluttered in a comfortable way, books piled on tables, a sewing basket overflowing with colorful threads, a vase of dried flowers. It felt lived in, personal, entirely unlike the formal parlors he was used to visiting. Ellen poured the tea herself, without waiting for the maid. Her hands moved gracefully, unself-consciously. "I'm afraid I'm still learning how to live in New York again," she said. "Everything seems smaller than I remember, or perhaps I've just grown used to larger spaces." "You lived in palaces, I understand," Newland said. She laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. "Oh, palaces can be prisons too, Mr. Archer. Sometimes the most luxurious ones are the worst." He did not know how to respond to that. It was too honest, too raw for polite conversation. So he said, "Your family is glad to have you back. May speaks of you often." "Sweet May," Ellen said softly. "She's like a child still, isn't she? Unspoiled. I envy her that innocence. I had it once, I think, but it seems a lifetime ago." Newland found himself studying her face, the shadows under her eyes, the slight sadness in her expression even when she smiled. "You've been through a great deal," he said gently. "Yes," she met his gaze directly. "But I don't wish to be pitied, Mr. Archer. I made choices. I married the Count. I thought I could. I thought love and will were enough. I was wrong. And when it became unbearable, I left. Now I'm here, and I'm trying to make sense of a world I barely recognize anymore. Is it so different from how you left it? Everything is different. I'm different." She set down her teacup and leaned forward slightly. "In Europe, I learned to speak my mind, to question things, to want more than I was given. And now I'm back in a place where women smile and nod and never, ever say what they truly think. It's suffocating." Newland felt a shock of recognition. He had never heard a woman, had never heard anyone, speak so freely about the constraints of their world. Men might joke about it in private, but even they accepted the rules as inevitable, necessary. But Ellen was questioning everything. "You'll adjust," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "It takes time." "Or perhaps I won't adjust," she said quietly. "Perhaps I've become too foreign, too strange. Perhaps there's no place for me here anymore." The sadness in her voice moved him. "There's always a place for family," he said. "May cares for you deeply. Your grandmother adores you. They want you to be happy. Do they?" Ellen's smile was wry. "Or do they want me to be quiet and respectable and not cause any more scandal? There's a difference, you know, between being happy and being acceptable." Again, that uncomfortable honesty. Newland found himself both attracted to it and alarmed by it. She was so unguarded, so willing to name the things everyone else carefully avoided. "I've been told," Ellen continued, "that I should take my husband back, that I should return to Europe and make the best of things. That separation is unseemly, that it reflects badly on the family." Newland stiffened. "Who told you that?" "Oh, several well-meaning aunts and cousins. They phrase it kindly, of course. They say it's for my own good, that a woman alone without a husband's protection is vulnerable, that society will be cruel." She paused. "And perhaps they're right. Perhaps I should go back. The Count has written, you know. He promises change. He says he misses me." "Do you believe him?" Newland asked, more sharply than he intended. "No," Ellen said simply, "but belief and necessity are different things. If I can't live here, if New York won't accept me, then where else can I go?" Newland felt a surge of protectiveness, almost anger. "You don't have to go back to a man who made you miserable. The family will support you. I'll make sure of it." She looked at him with surprise and something that might have been gratitude. "You're very kind, Mr. Archer, but kindness and reality don't always align. What can the family do if society turns against me? If doors close, if invitations stop, if I'm tolerated but never truly accepted? Then we'll fight," he said, surprising himself with his vehemence. "You deserve happiness. You deserve safety." "If the Count was cruel, he was," she said quietly. "Not always, not at first, but yes, eventually he was cruel." The admission hung between them, heavy with unspoken details. Newland felt a wave of fury at this unknown man, this foreign Count who had hurt her. "Then you must never go back," he said firmly. "Whatever it takes, whatever society says, you have the right to live free of that. I'll speak to your family, I'll make them understand." Ellen's eyes glistened, and for a moment he thought she might cry, but she blinked, steadied herself, and smiled. "You're a good man, Mr. Archer. May is fortunate." The mention of May brought him back to himself, reminded him of his role, his position. He was not here as Ellen's champion, exactly. He was here as her cousin's fiancé, offering familial support, nothing more. But as he prepared to leave, as Ellen walked him to the door and thanked him for his visit, he felt something shift inside him. A sense that this woman mattered, that her freedom mattered, in a way he didn't fully understand but couldn't deny. "Come back and visit us again," Ellen said at the door, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the draft. "It's lonely here and you're easy to talk to. I find I can say things to you I couldn't say to others." "I will," Newland promised. He walked home slowly through the winter streets, his mind full of her words, her face, the sadness and strength he'd seen in her. She was like no woman he'd ever known, raw where others were polished, honest where others were careful, searching where others seemed content. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered a question he did not yet dare to fully hear. What if you married the wrong woman? But he pushed the thought away. May was perfect. May was chosen. May was his future. Ellen Olenska was merely a family obligation, a cousin to be helped and protected. That was all she could ever be, wasn't it? The thought troubled him all through dinner, all through the evening. And that night when he finally slept, he dreamed of a yellow house near the docks, and a woman standing at the window, looking out at a world she no longer recognized, searching for a place she might someday call home. The next time Newland saw Ellen was at the engagement dinner his mother hosted to celebrate his betrothal to May. It was a formal affair, held in the Archer family townhouse on a cold February evening. The dining room glowed with candlelight. The table was set with the family's finest china and crystal. Roses, imported at great expense from the south, filled elaborate vases. The guest list was carefully curated: family, close friends, people of the right kind. Old Mrs. Mingot arrived in her carriage like a reigning monarch, dismissing Newland's mother's concerns about the stairs with a wave of her hand. May's parents came, all smiles and approval. And Ellen came too, looking elegant but somehow out of place, in a dark red gown that stood out among the pastels the other women wore. Newland greeted each guest with the appropriate words, the expected gestures. This was theater, and he knew his role. May stood beside him, radiant in pale pink silk, her eyes shining with happiness. She was in her element here, gracious and charming, perfectly trained for this life of receiving rooms and formal dinners. "Isn't it wonderful?" she whispered to him during a quiet moment. "Everyone we love all together. I'm so happy, Newland." "So am I," he said and meant it, or thought he did. But when Ellen entered the room and his eyes went to her automatically, he felt again that strange pull, that sense of something unfinished. Ellen greeted him warmly, kissed May's cheek, and complimented the arrangements. But Newland noticed the way certain guests stiffened when she approached, the way conversations paused fractionally before resuming. She was accepted here because of Mrs. Mingot's protection and May's affection, but she was not entirely welcomed. The distinction was subtle but unmistakable. At dinner, Newland found himself seated between May and his sister Janie, while Ellen sat farther down the table between an elderly uncle and a family friend. He watched her throughout the meal, saw how she listened with real attention when people spoke to her, how she laughed at their jokes, how she seemed to bring a kind of vitality to the conversation. But he also saw the moments when her smile faded slightly, when her eyes grew distant, as if she were remembering other dinners, other tables, perhaps in European palaces where the chandeliers were grander and the company more cosmopolitan. After the main course, Newland's mother rose to make a small speech. She spoke of family, tradition, the joy of seeing her son embark on marriage with such a lovely young woman. She spoke of her own marriage to Newland's father, God rest his soul, and the happiness they had shared. She spoke of continuity, of generations, of the importance of choosing well and honoring one's commitments. "Marriage," she said, her voice soft but firm, "is the foundation of our society. It is not merely a union of two people, but a bond that ties families together, that creates stability and order. It requires patience, loyalty, and above all, a willingness to put duty before personal desire." Newland heard the words and knew they were aimed, at least in part, at Ellen. His mother was making a point, as subtle as lace and as sharp as glass. Marriage is sacred. Separation is wrong. Duty matters more than happiness. Ellen's face remained composed, but Newland saw the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her fingers gripped her wine glass. She was being judged, even here, even at what was supposed to be a celebration. When it came time for Newland to respond, as tradition demanded, he stood and looked around the table at the assembled faces, family, friends, society. "I'm grateful," he began, his voice steady, "for the love and support of everyone here. May and I are beginning our life together with the blessing of our families, and that means everything." He paused, then added, almost without thinking, "And I hope we'll always remember that love, real love, means accepting people as they are, not as we wish them to be. It means offering support when it's needed, even when it's difficult, even when it challenges our assumptions." There was a brief, surprised silence. His mother looked at him sharply. May smiled, not quite understanding. But Ellen met his gaze across the table, and in her eyes he saw recognition and something that might have been gratitude. The moment passed. Toasts were drunk. Conversations resumed. And the evening continued in its ordained path, warm and correct and utterly predictable. Later, as the guests mingled in the drawing room, Newland found himself standing near Ellen by the windows. Outside, snow was falling again, soft and silent in the lamplight. "That was kind of you," Ellen said quietly. "What you said at dinner, about accepting people." "I meant it," Newland said. "Did you?" She looked at him thoughtfully. "I wonder if you know how unusual that is. Most people don't mean what they say, not really. They say what's expected. Perhaps I'm tired of saying what's expected." Ellen smiled. "Be careful, Mr. Archer. That kind of thinking is dangerous. It leads to all sorts of trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind where you start to question everything, where you look around at this beautiful, orderly world and see the cage underneath." She gestured vaguely at the room, the guests, the glittering scene. "Once you see the cage, it's very hard to unsee it. You speak from experience." "I speak from mistakes," she said softly. "I saw the cage, and I tried to escape it by marrying a count and running away to Europe. But I only traded one cage for another, a worse one. And now I'm back looking for, I don't even know what, freedom, belonging, both perhaps, though I'm not sure they can exist together." Newland wanted to say something comforting, something wise, but May approached them with her sweet smile, linking her arm through his. "What are you two talking about so seriously?" she asked. "This is supposed to be a party." We're talking about happiness, Ellen said smoothly, and how fortunate you are, May, to have found it so young. May blushed with pleasure. I am fortunate. Newland is everything I could want. Isn't he, Ellen? Don't you think we're perfectly suited? Perfectly, Ellen agreed, but her eyes held a sadness that belied the word. The next day, Newland was summoned to his mother's sitting room. She was arranging flowers, a domestic task she claimed to find soothing. Sit down, Newland, she said without preamble. We need to talk about your cousin Ellen. She's not my cousin yet, he said mildly, taking a seat. She will be soon enough, and that's precisely why we need to discuss her. His mother set down the shears and turned to face him. She's talking about getting a divorce, Newland, an actual divorce. The word fell between them like a stone. Who told you that? Newland asked. It doesn't matter who told me. The point is, it would be a disaster. For her, for the family, for everyone. A divorce proceeding would involve scandal, publicity, lawyers asking terrible questions. The Count's behavior would be examined, yes, but so would Ellen's. Every moment of her marriage, every decision she made, would be dissected. And even if she won, even if the divorce was granted, she would be ruined. No respectable family would receive her. She'd be cast out entirely. Newland felt a chill. He knew his mother was right. The double standard was vicious. A man could be unfaithful, cruel, even violent, and society would overlook it. But a woman who sought legal separation would be destroyed by the very process meant to free her. What do you want me to do? He asked quietly. Talk to her. Convince her to give up this foolish idea. She listens to you. I've seen it, you have influence. I'm not sure that's true. Then acquire influence, his mother said sharply. You're going to be a member of this family. You have a responsibility to protect its reputation. Ellen's scandal would touch May, would touch you, would touch all of us. We're asking you to help her see reason. Newland felt the weight of it, the duty, the expectation, the unspoken threat that his own position depended on his compliance. This was how the world worked. You protected the family, you maintained appearances. Individual happiness mattered less than collective reputation. I'll speak to her, he said finally. His mother relaxed visibly. Good, I knew I could count on you. You understand what's important, Newland. You always have. But as he left the house and walked through the afternoon streets, Newland felt a growing unease. He was being asked to persuade Ellen to give up her one chance at real freedom, to convince her to remain tied to a man who had made her miserable, all for the sake of propriety. It was the right thing to do by society's standards. It was his duty, as May's fiancé, as a member of the family. But was it right by any other measure? He thought of Ellen's face, her words about cages and freedom. He thought of her courage in leaving the Count, the strength it must have taken to walk away from wealth and security in search of something better. And now he was supposed to tell her to go back, to give up, to accept unhappiness for the sake of appearances. The thought sickened him, but what choice did he have? He was engaged to May. He had responsibilities. He couldn't simply champion Ellen's rebellion without consequences. The world didn't work that way. So he walked on through the winter afternoon, caught between duty and conscience, between what he was supposed to do and what he wanted to do, feeling for the first time the real weight of the cage Ellen had described. Beautiful, well-appointed, and absolutely inescapable. Newland went to see Ellen with the intention of doing his duty. He would speak to her calmly, rationally. He would explain the consequences of seeking a divorce, the scandal, the social death, the impossibility of making a life in New York afterward. He would convince her that staying separated but legally married to the Count was the wisest course. It was what the family wanted. It was what society demanded. It was the right thing. But when he arrived at the little yellow house and Ellen opened the door herself, dressed in a simple gray dress with her hair falling loose, all his prepared speeches fled from his mind. Newland, she said, smiling. She had started using his first name, and he had started using hers, though neither could say exactly when the shift had occurred. Come in. I was just making tea, or trying to. Your American servants are mystified by my European habits. The house smelled of wood smoke and something sweet, cinnamon, perhaps. Ellen led him to the small sitting room where a fire crackled in the grate. Books lay open on the sofa. A shawl embroidered with exotic flowers was draped over a chair. It was a room that felt lived in, comfortable, utterly unlike the formal parlors of Fifth Avenue. I've been reading, Ellen said, gesturing to the books. Trying to catch up on what I've missed. Your American poets, Whitman, Emerson, they write about freedom as if it's possible, as if one could simply choose to live differently and the world would allow it. Is that what you want? Newland asked, sitting in the chair she indicated. To live differently, isn't that what everyone wants? Ellen settled onto the sofa, tucking her feet beneath her in a way that would have scandalized his mother. Or am I alone in that? I think, Newland said carefully, that most people want to be happy within the confines of what's acceptable. They adjust their desires to match their circumstances. And you, Ellen looked at him directly, have you adjusted? The question struck deeper than it should have. He thought of his life, predictable, secure, mapped out in advance. Marriage to May. Partnership in the law firm. Summers in Newport. Children. Grandchildren. The same patterns his father had followed and his grandfather before him. I've never had to, he said finally. My desires and my circumstances have always aligned. How fortunate, Ellen said softly, or how careful you've been not to desire the wrong things. Before he could respond, she stood and went to the window, looking out at the street where children played and vendors called their wares. I've been told you wanted to speak to me, she said, about the divorce. Newland felt his prepared arguments rise to his lips. Ellen, yes, the family is concerned. A divorce would be scandalous, she finished. Destructive. Shameful, I know, I've heard it all already. Your mother was very thorough. So was Aunt Welland, and several others. They all say the same thing. Better to remain married to a man who made me miserable than to seek freedom and face society's judgment. It's not that simple, Newland said. A divorce action would involve publicity. Lawyers would dig into every detail of your marriage. The Count's behavior would be examined, yes, but so would yours. Every friendship, every letter, every moment would be scrutinized for evidence of wrongdoing. On my part, you mean? Because surely if the marriage failed, I must have been at fault somehow. Ellen's voice was bitter. Never mind that he kept a mistress openly. Never mind the gambling debts, the cruelty, the nights he came home drunk, and she stopped abruptly, turning away. Newland felt a surge of rage at this unknown man who had hurt her. Ellen, I'm sorry, I'm not defending him. I'm trying to protect you from an ordeal that would destroy you. Destroy me more than staying chained to him. She turned back to face him. I left because I had to, Newland. I left because if I'd stayed another month, another week, I would have lost myself entirely. And now everyone is telling me that leaving wasn't enough. They want me to go back. Not go back. Just remain legally tied. In name only, you'd stay here in New York. The Count would stay in Europe. You'd be separated but not divorced. Society can accept that. It happens. So I should live in limbo forever. Never fully free, never able to make a new life. Ellen's eyes filled with frustrated tears. Do you know what that means? To be neither wife nor widow. To be pitied and whispered about forever. I know it's not fair, Newland said helplessly. But the alternative is I fight. I claim my freedom legally. I face down the scandal and the questions and the judgment, and I come out the other side divorced and free. You'd be alone, Newland said. Completely alone. No one would receive you. You couldn't go to parties, dinners, the opera. You'd be cut off from everything. Maybe I'd rather be alone and free than accepted and imprisoned. The words hung in the air between them. Newland realized he was standing now, though he didn't remember rising. They were close, closer than was proper, and he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes, the rapid rise and fall of her breath. Ellen, he said, his voice rough. Don't throw your life away, please. You have friends here, family who love you. Don't sacrifice all of that for a principle. Is freedom just a principle to you? She asked. Is happiness? Or are they real things, things worth fighting for? They're real, he said. But sometimes, often, we can't have them. We have to make compromises. We have to accept limitations. That's part of being an adult, Ellen. Part of living in society. Part of living in a cage, she corrected. You said before that I see the cage. But you see it too, Newland. I know you do. I can see it in your eyes when you sit through those endless dinners, when you make polite conversation about nothing, when you do what's expected instead of what you want. You see the bars as clearly as I do. Maybe, he admitted. But seeing them doesn't mean I can walk away from them. I have responsibilities. I'm engaged to May. I have a life here, a position. I can't just, I'm not asking you to, Ellen said quickly. I'm just saying I understand. I understand what it costs to live by the rules. I did it for years with the Count. I smiled and played the role of the perfect countess while inside I was dying, and I can't do it anymore. I can't. Newland wanted to take her hands to comfort her, but he knew he shouldn't. Already this conversation had strayed far beyond what was appropriate. He was alone with her, arguing with her, feeling things for her that he had no right to feel. "What would make you happy?" he asked softly. "If you could have anything. What would you choose?" Ellen looked at him for a long moment. "I'd choose honesty," she said. "I'd choose a life where I could say what I think and feel what I feel without pretense. I'd choose simplicity over luxury, truth over propriety. I'd choose," she trailed off, shaking her head. "It doesn't matter what I'd choose. The world doesn't work that way." "No," Newland agreed, his heart aching. "It doesn't." They stood in silence, the fire crackling, the afternoon light fading into evening. Somewhere outside, a church bell rang, the ordinary sounds of life continuing, indifferent to private sorrows. "I should go," Newland said finally. "It's getting late. May will be expecting me for dinner." "Of course." Ellen stepped back, restoring the proper distance between them. "Thank you for coming, Newland. Thank you for trying. I know you meant well." "I'll keep trying," he said, "to help, to protect you if I can." "From the Count or from myself?" Ellen asked with a sad smile. "From anyone who would hurt you." At the door, she touched his arm lightly. "Be careful," she said. "Caring about people outside the approved circle, it's dangerous. It makes you question things. And once you start questioning, it's hard to stop." "Maybe I want to question things," he said, surprising himself. "Then God help us both," Ellen whispered. He left the yellow house and walked home through the darkening streets, his mind in turmoil. He had gone there to convince Ellen to give up her fight for divorce. But instead, she had made him question everything he'd ever believed about duty, happiness, and the price of living by society's rules. He should tell her to go back to the Count. He should insist on it as his mother wanted, as the family expected. But when he imagined Ellen in that distant palace, trapped with a cruel man, slowly losing the spark that made her who she was, he wanted to burn the whole system down. The realization terrified him, because he was engaged to May, because he had responsibilities, because men like him didn't burn things down, they maintained them, they upheld them, they sacrificed desire for duty. That was what it meant to be honorable, wasn't it? He no longer knew. In the weeks following that conversation, Newland found himself thinking about Ellen constantly. Her words haunted him, about cages and freedom, about choosing truth over propriety. At night, he dreamed of the yellow house, of firelight on dark hair, of a voice speaking honestly about things no one else dared to name. And the dreams troubled him, because he was engaged to May, because his wedding was approaching, because he had no right to these thoughts, these feelings, this pull toward a woman who was not his fiancée. He tried to focus on May, to appreciate her sweetness, her beauty, the uncomplicated joy she brought to their relationship. She was planning the wedding with her mother, selecting flowers and discussing menus with an enthusiasm that was both touching and, if he was honest, slightly exhausting. Every dinner became a discussion of guest lists and seating arrangements. Every visit involved choices about silver patterns and honeymoon itineraries. May wanted everything to be perfect, and her idea of perfection was elaborate, traditional, exactly like every other society wedding. Newland found himself nodding and agreeing, saying yes to things he barely heard, his mind drifting to other, darker thoughts. What if he was making a mistake? What if marrying May meant trapping himself forever in the life he was beginning to question? What if there was another way, another possibility? The thoughts were dangerous, he knew that. So he did what men in his position had done for generations. He doubled down on his commitment. He pushed his doubts away. And he asked May to move up the wedding date. They were sitting in the Welland drawing room on a rainy March afternoon when he broached the subject. May's mother was there, as always. Young ladies were not left alone with their fiancés, but she sat far enough away to give them the illusion of privacy. "May," Newland said, taking her hand, "I've been thinking. Why should we wait until autumn to marry? Let's move the wedding up. Let's marry this spring as soon as possible." May looked surprised and pleased. "Oh, Newland, do you really mean it? But there's so much to prepare. Mother says these things take months to arrange properly." "I don't care about proper arrangements," he said, surprising himself with his vehemence. "I care about being married to you, about starting our life together. Why should we wait?" Mrs. Welland, overhearing, looked alarmed. But Newland, there's the trousseau to consider, the invitations, the flowers. One can't simply throw together a wedding in a matter of weeks. Why not? Newland asked. People elope all the time. We could go to City Hall tomorrow. May gasped, half delighted, half scandalized. Newland, you can't be serious. What would people say? What would people say? Always that question. Always the weight of society's opinion determining every choice, every action. I'm serious, he said more gently. Maybe not City Hall, but a small ceremony. Soon, family only. Simple and quick. Mrs. Welland looked as though he'd suggested something indecent, but May, after a moment of consideration, smiled. I think it's romantic, she said. You're so eager to marry me that you can't wait. Oh, Newland, if you really want to, I'll speak to Mother and Father. Perhaps we could manage something by June. It wasn't as soon as he wanted, but it was sooner than the October date they'd set. He agreed, and within days the household was in an uproar of revised plans and accelerated preparations. If Newland had expected the new wedding date to bring him peace, to quiet his doubts, he was disappointed. Instead, as the days ticked down toward June, he felt an increasing sense of panic, as though he were racing toward something irreversible, while part of him screamed to slow down, to stop, to think. He saw Ellen less frequently during this time. She had taken his advice, or rather, the family's advice conveyed through him, and quietly dropped her plans for divorce. The Count's lawyer had sent papers offering a generous settlement if she would only return to Europe and resume the appearance of being a wife. Ellen had refused the return, but accepted the money. She would remain in New York, separated but not divorced, living quietly on the Count's allowance. It was, everyone agreed, the best possible outcome. Ellen was safe. The family was protected from scandal. Society could pretend nothing had happened. But the few times Newland did see her, at family gatherings or opera performances, he noticed a change. She seemed quieter, more withdrawn. The spark he'd seen in her, that defiant vitality, seemed dimmed. She had been tamed, fitted back into the cage she'd tried to escape, and he had helped do it. He had advised her, had convinced her, had played his role in clipping her wings. The guilt gnawed at him. One evening in late May, just weeks before the wedding, Newland was invited to a small dinner party at Mrs. Mingott's. Ellen would be there, he was told, and May, of course, and various family members. He arrived early and found Ellen alone in the conservatory, among the palms and orchids that Mrs. Mingott cultivated with such pride. She was looking at a particularly exotic flower, her fingers hovering near its petals but not quite touching. Newland, she said when she noticed him, you're early too, or perhaps we're both trying to steal a few moments of peace before the performance begins. Performance? He asked. Dinner, conversation, all of it. It's theater, isn't it? We all play our parts. Her smile was sad. I've learned my lines again. I remember the script. A separated countess who lives quietly and troubles no one. Ellen, I don't apologize, she said quickly. You were right. A divorce would have been impossible. I see that now. This is better, safer. Are you happy? The question escaped before he could stop it. She looked at him with those dark, clear eyes. Happiness seems like something from another language. I'm settled, I'm surviving, that's something. It's not enough, he said fiercely. It's what there is. They stood in silence, surrounded by the heavy perfume of tropical flowers, the humid air pressing close. Newland felt a desperate urge to say something, to offer something, but what could he offer? He was marrying May in 3 weeks. His life was decided. Ellen's life was decided. They had both made their choices, or had choices made for them. I'm glad you moved up the wedding, Ellen said finally. May is glowing, she loves you very much. I know. The words felt like stones in his mouth. Be good to her, Newland, she deserves happiness. She deserves someone who is, fully present. I will be, I am. Ellen tilted her head, studied him. Are you, or are you like me, playing a part, saying the lines while inside you're somewhere else entirely? He couldn't answer. Couldn't lie to her and couldn't speak the truth. I thought so, she said softly. We're the same, you and I, we see the bars of the cage, but you're choosing to stay inside. You're marrying May, building your life, accepting what is. Perhaps that's wiser than my way. Perhaps fighting only brings more pain. Ellen, but voices approached, other guests arriving. The moment shattered. Ellen straightened, smoothed her dress, arranged her face into a polite smile. By the time May appeared, radiant in pale blue, Ellen was the perfect picture of a devoted cousin, congratulating her on the approaching nuptials with apparent sincerity. Newland played his part too, the eager groom, the devoted fiancé, the man who had everything he wanted. And later, when he left the dinner party and rode home through the spring night, past blooming gardens and lit windows, he felt the bars of the cage more clearly than ever before. N felt the bars of the cage more clearly than he ever had before. He was 3 weeks from his wedding, and instead of feeling joy, he felt like a prisoner awaiting execution. The thought was disloyal, terrible, something he should never admit even to himself. May was wonderful. Their life together would be good, comfortable, secure. He would be happy enough, happy enough. The words echoed in his mind, hollow and insufficient. But what else could he do? Change his mind, break the engagement, disgrace May and her family, destroy his own reputation. And for what? The impossible dream of choosing Ellen, of building a life with a woman society had already marked as scandalous. It was fantasy, madness. So he went home, went to bed, and tried to sleep. The wedding would happen, he would marry May. And Ellen would fade into the background of his life, a might have been, a road not taken, or so he told himself. But 3 weeks later, as he stood at the altar watching May walk down the aisle in her white dress and veil, her face filled with innocent trust, he saw Ellen standing among the guests. And their eyes met for just a moment heavy with everything unsaid, everything impossible, everything lost. Then May reached his side. He turned to her, and the ceremony began. The honeymoon was everything a honeymoon should be. Newland and May traveled through Europe for 3 months, visiting London, Paris, Venice, Rome. They saw museums and cathedrals, walked through gardens, dined in elegant restaurants. May was enchanted by everything, the art, the architecture, the fashions. She collected impressions like souvenirs, eager to share them with her friends when they returned home. Newland showed her the sights, translated menus, handled travel arrangements. He was attentive, patient, kind. He held her hand in the galleries, kissed her forehead when she was tired, listened to her commentary on paintings and palaces. He was everything a new husband should be. And yet, through it all, he felt like he was watching himself from a distance, playing the role of the devoted bridegroom while something inside him remained untouched, unreached. May was sweet. She was lovely. She was exactly what she had always been. But when he looked at her examining a Botticelli or admiring the view from their hotel balcony, he felt a strange emptiness. She appreciated the beauty, yes, but in a superficial way, the way someone admires a pretty dress or a nicely arranged bouquet. There was no depth to her observations, no hunger to understand, no questions that went beneath the surface. And he found himself thinking, often, of what Ellen might say if she were here. How she would see these paintings differently, having lived in Europe for years. How she would bring context and complexity to the art, the cities, the culture. How conversations with her would open doors of understanding rather than simply catalog impressions. He felt guilty for the comparison. It was unfair to May, who was being herself, who had never pretended to be anything else. The fault was his for expecting more, for wanting more, for being unable to quiet the voice in his head that whispered, "Is this all there is?" They returned to New York in September, to the house Newland's family had given them as a wedding gift. It was a beautiful house on East 39th Street, tastefully furnished, with high ceilings and tall windows. May set about making it their home with enthusiasm, consulting with decorators, selecting wallpaper, arranging furniture. She wanted everything perfect, and her idea of perfection was traditional, conventional, exactly like the homes of all their friends. Newland let her have her way in most things. It seemed important to her, and he had no strong opinions about curtain patterns or china choices. He went to his law office each day, returning in the evening to find May overseeing some new improvement or excitedly showing him fabric samples. Their life together settled into a comfortable routine. Dinners at home or with family, evenings at the opera or theater, weekends visiting friends in the country. It was pleasant, it was respectable. It was exactly what they had both been raised to expect from marriage, and it was slowly suffocating him. He tried to fight the feeling, tried to convince himself that this restlessness was normal, temporary, something that would pass as he adjusted to married life. But the feeling only grew stronger as the weeks went by. And then, one evening in late October, they had dinner at Mrs. Mingott's, and Ellen was there. Newland hadn't seen her since the wedding. She had spent the summer out of town, staying with friends in Newport and then in Boston. But now she was back, and when he walked into Mrs. Mingott's drawing room and saw her standing by the fireplace, something in his chest constricted painfully. She had changed. She looked thinner, pale. There was a fragility to her that hadn't been there before, as though something essential had been worn away. But when she smiled at May, when she congratulated them on their marriage and their new home, her voice was warm and her manner gracious. "You must let me come visit you," Ellen said to May. "I'd love to see how you've arranged everything. I'm sure it's beautiful." "Oh, please do come," May said eagerly. "Come to tea next Thursday. We're having a few friends." "It would be lovely to have you." Newland said nothing. He couldn't trust his voice. Seeing Ellen again after months apart was like coming up for air after nearly drowning. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed her until this moment, and the realization was devastating. Throughout dinner, he watched her surreptitiously. She spoke little, ate less. When Mrs. Mingott asked about her summer, she gave vague, polite answers. When others discussed the upcoming social season, she smiled and nodded but didn't participate. She seemed present but not really there, as though part of her had retreated to some far interior place no one could reach. After dinner, while the other guests mingled in the drawing room, Newland found himself near Ellen by the windows. Outside, rain fell softly, blurring the streetlights. "You've been well?" he asked quietly. "Yes, thank you. And you, married life suits you?" "It's an adjustment," he said carefully. Ellen glanced at him, and for a moment her mask slipped. He saw exhaustion in her eyes and sadness so deep it made his heart ache. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Ellen, are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said automatically. Then more honestly, "I'm lonely. Isn't that absurd? I'm surrounded by family, by people who care about me, and yet I feel more alone than I ever did in Europe." "Because here you have to pretend," Newland said, understanding. "You have to wear the mask, play the part." "Yes." She looked at him with a flash of the old connection, the recognition that had always existed between them. "Exactly that. In Europe, even when I was miserable, at least I could be honestly miserable. Here, I have to smile and pretend everything is fine. I have to be grateful for my freedom, such as it is." "I wish things were different," Newland said helplessly. "So do I, but wishing doesn't change anything, does it?" She turned from the window to face him fully. "You look different too, Newland. Marriage has changed you." "How?" "You seem dimmer somehow. As though someone turned down a lamp inside you." The observation was so accurate it stung. "You're imagining things," he said. "Perhaps." But her eyes said she knew the truth. May appeared then, linking her arm through Newland's with wifely affection. "Newland, we should go soon. You have an early meeting tomorrow, remember." "Of course." He let her lead him away, but he looked back once at Ellen, who stood alone by the window, watching the rain. Over the following weeks, Ellen did come to their house for tea. She came to dinners. She became a regular part of their social circle. And Newland had to endure the exquisite torture of seeing her often, seeing her in his home, watching her laugh with May, and never being able to speak to her honestly, to ask what he really wanted to ask. "Do you think of me? Do you regret that I married May? Do you feel this same ache, this sense that we're both living the wrong lives?" But such questions were impossible. So instead he made polite conversation. He passed her tea cups and cake plates. He discussed books and plays in the careful, shallow way that society permitted. And all the while, he felt himself dying a little more each day, the bright possibility of who he might have been fading into the gray reality of who he had become. May, sweet May, noticed none of this. She was happy. Their marriage was successful by every measure that mattered to her. They hosted dinners. They were invited everywhere. They were building a respectable, pleasant life. And Newland knew he should be grateful. He had a beautiful wife, a comfortable home, a promising career. He had everything a man of his class could want, everything except the one thing that mattered. One evening, after Ellen had left following one of May's tea parties, May turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Ellen seems sad, don't you think?" "Yes," Newland said. "I think she is. I wish she could be happy. I wish she could find someone to love her, to take care of her." "She was married," Newland reminded her. "It didn't end well, but that was different. That was an arranged match, practically. I mean real love. Like what we have." Newland looked at his wife, at her innocent, trusting face, and felt a wave of guilt so intense it was almost physical. She believed in their love. She trusted him completely. She had no idea that his heart was elsewhere, that every time he looked at her cousin, he felt a longing so powerful it terrified him. "Yes," he managed, "like what we have." May smiled, satisfied, and went back to arranging flowers in a vase. And Newland stood there in his beautiful house with his beautiful wife, feeling the weight of the cage settle more firmly onto his shoulders. He had made his choice. He had married May. He had committed to this life. And now he would have to live with the consequences of that choice. For the rest of his days, watching the woman he really loved from a careful distance, pretending everything was as it should be, while inside he slowly turned to stone. Winter came to New York, and with it the full swing of the social season. Dinners, balls, theater performances, the calendar filled with obligations and entertainments. Newland and May moved through it all with practiced ease, a handsome young couple admired by everyone. They were perfect together, people said, so well suited, so fortunate. And through it all, Ellen was there. Not always physically present, but always there in Newland's thoughts, his awareness. When she did attend the same gatherings, he was acutely conscious of her, where she stood, whom she spoke to, when she laughed or looked sad. They developed an unspoken understanding, a careful choreography of glances and brief conversations that satisfied the demands of propriety while acknowledging the deeper current that ran between them. They were never alone together. They never said anything improper. But in the space between words, in the silences and the looks that lasted a fraction too long, entire conversations happened. One evening at the opera, the same venue where they'd first met after Ellen's return, Newland found himself in the Mingot box between acts. May had gone to visit friends in another box, leaving him to chat with Mrs. Mingot and Ellen. The old woman dozed in her chair while Newland and Ellen stood at the railing, looking down at the audience below, a sea of silk and jewels and feathered fans. "Do you remember," Ellen said softly, "the first night I came back? When I sat in this box and everyone stared? I remember. I thought then that I could find a place here, that New York could be home again." She paused. "I was wrong. Ellen, no, let me finish." Her voice was barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. "I've learned something in these months. I've learned that there are different kinds of exile. In Europe, I was physically far from home. Here I'm home but still exiled from honesty, from real connection, from any hope of what I want." "What do you want?" The question was dangerous, but he had to ask it. She turned to look at him, and the naked longing in her eyes made his breath catch. "What I can't have." The weight of those words settled between them. What I can't have. She meant him. He knew it, and she knew he knew it. The admission hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. "Ellen," he managed, his voice rough. "Don't." She held up a hand. "Don't say anything kind or comforting or proper. I couldn't bear it. I just needed you to know. Once. Just once I needed to tell the truth." Before he could respond, May returned, flushed and happy from her social rounds. "Oh, Newland, you should have come with me. Everyone was asking about you." He turned to his wife, forced a smile. "I was keeping Ellen company." "How sweet of you," May said, kissing Ellen's cheek. "Isn't he thoughtful, Ellen?" "Very," Ellen said, her voice perfectly controlled now, the mask back in place. The rest of the opera passed in a blur. Newland heard none of the music, saw none of the performance. He sat rigid in his chair, feeling the impossible weight of Ellen's confession, the truth that could never be spoken again, but could never be unheard. In the weeks that followed, they saw each other often, always in groups, always properly chaperoned. May liked having Ellen around. She considered her a dear friend, a beloved cousin. She invited her to their home constantly, never suspecting that each visit was both heaven and hell for Newland. They developed ways of communicating that went unnoticed by others. A certain tone of voice meant "I'm thinking of you." A particular book recommendation carried deeper meaning. When Ellen mentioned she'd been reading Rossetti's poetry, Newland knew she was telling him she understood beauty and sorrow entwined. When they discussed a play, the words about the characters were really about themselves. It was a kind of madness, conducting a love affair entirely in subtext, in glances and silences and carefully chosen phrases. But it was the only way they had. One afternoon in January, Newland arrived home to find Ellen and May having tea in the drawing room. May greeted him with her usual affection, but she seemed distracted, excited about something. Newland, Ellen has had the most wonderful suggestion. Tell him, Ellen. Ellen set down her teacup. I was just saying that I might go back to Washington. I spent some time there last year, and I have friends there. I thought I might visit for a few months. Something cold settled in Newland's chest. Washington? It's a good idea, don't you think? May said. Ellen finds New York so dull. In Washington, there's more variety. Diplomats, politicians, artists. She'll be happier there. Happier, or farther away. Removed from the dangerous proximity that was wearing them both down. When would you go? Newland asked, keeping his voice neutral. Perhaps next week, Ellen said, not quite meeting his eyes. It seems best not to delay. Best for whom? He wanted to ask. Best in what way? But he knew the answer. Best for propriety. Best for appearances. Best for preserving the careful fiction that they felt nothing for each other beyond cousinly affection. I'll miss you terribly, May said, taking Ellen's hand. But I understand. You must do what makes you happy. Happy. That word again, so inadequate for the complexity of what they all felt. That evening, after Ellen had left, Newland made an excuse to go out. He told May he had documents to review at the office. Instead, he walked. He walked for hours through the freezing January night, past the lit windows of houses where other lives unfolded, where other people lived without this constant ache, this impossible wanting. He thought of Ellen going to Washington. He imagined weeks, months without seeing her. Perhaps it was better. Perhaps distance would cure him of this obsession, would let him return to his marriage with full attention, would restore the peace he'd felt before she re-entered his life. But he knew it was a lie. Distance wouldn't cure anything. It would only make the longing worse, more desperate. The next day, he sent her a note, brief, careful, the kind of note that could be shown to anyone without impropriety. I understand you're leaving for Washington. Might I call to say goodbye? As May's representative, of course. Her response came within hours. Please do. Tomorrow at 3, if convenient. He arrived at the Yellow House at precisely 3 o'clock, his heart pounding in a way that made him feel ridiculous. He was 28 years old, a married man, a respectable lawyer. This should not feel like the most important moment of his life. Ellen opened the door herself. The house was quiet. The maid had the afternoon off. They were alone, and both of them knew they shouldn't be, that it was improper, possibly even scandalous if anyone found out. But neither suggested leaving the door open or calling a chaperone. Come in, Ellen said. It's too cold to stand in the doorway. He followed her into the familiar sitting room. A fire burned in the grate. 2 trunks sat half-packed in the corner, evidence of the coming departure. So you're really going, Newland said. I think I must, don't you see? Staying here, seeing you constantly, knowing I can never. She stopped, pressed her hands to her face. I can't do it anymore, Newland. It's killing me. Then don't go. The words escaped before he could stop them. Stay, we'll find a way. What way? Ellen turned to him, her eyes bright tears. What way is there, Newland? You're married to May. She loves you. She trusts you. And I've already broken every rule, disgraced myself, separated from my husband. I won't be the woman who ruins your marriage too. I won't destroy May to save myself. You're not destroying anything. I am. I married her when I should have. When you should have what? Waited. For me, I wasn't free. I'm still not free. We're both trapped, don't you see? By choices made long ago, by circumstances we can't change. Then let's change them, Newland said desperately. Ellen, if we truly love each other. Oh, my darling, she whispered, and the endearment hung in the air like a benediction and a curse. Love changes nothing. Love just makes the cage more painful to see. He crossed the distance between them, took her hands in his. They were cold, trembling. I can't let you go, I can't lose you. You never had me, not really, and you never will. Tears spilled down her cheeks. But sometimes I think the wanting, the almost having, is its own kind of treasure. If we actually tried to be together, really together, it would mean scandal and ruin and exile. We'd destroy May, we'd destroy ourselves, and eventually we'd destroy what we feel for each other. You don't know that. I do. I've seen it, I lived it with the Count. Passion without honor, love without respect, it curdles Newland. It turns into something ugly. I won't let that happen to us. I won't let what we have, this pure, impossible thing, become tainted. So instead, we never have it at all, his voice broke. Instead, we keep it safe, perfect, untouched. She lifted her hand to his face, touched his cheek gently. It was the first time she'd touched him beyond a handshake, and the sensation was electric, devastating. "Say goodbye to me, Newland. Let me go to Washington. Let us both survive this." He wanted to argue. He wanted to pick her up, carry her away from this house, this city, this entire constrained world. He wanted to burn down everything that stood between them. But he was who he was, and this was the world they lived in. "Goodbye, Ellen," he whispered. She rose on her toes, kissed his cheek, the lightest brush of her lips against his skin. "Goodbye, my love." He left the yellow house and walked home through the winter twilight, feeling as though something vital had been torn from his chest. Ellen would leave for Washington. He would stay with May. They would both go on living their acceptable lives, keeping the unspoken understanding locked safely in their hearts, where it could hurt no one but themselves. Ellen went to Washington, and for a time, Newland tried to forget her. He threw himself into his work, taking on new clients and difficult cases. He was attentive to May, accompanying her to social events, listening to her chatter about household matters and friends' gossip. He tried to be the husband she deserved, but Ellen's absence was a presence in itself, a hollow space where she should have been. At gatherings where the Mingot family assembled, someone would mention her. Ellen writes that Washington is charming, or Ellen sends her love, and Newland would feel the wound reopen. May, oblivious to his suffering, seemed happy with their life. She was settling into the role of young matron with grace and enthusiasm. She redecorated the drawing room. She planned elaborate dinners. She spoke often of starting a family, of the children they would have. And Newland nodded and agreed, feeling more distant from her with each passing day, even as he shared her bed, her table, her life. Spring came. Ellen remained in Washington. Letters arrived occasionally, addressed to May, but sometimes including a postscript for Mr. Archer. The postscripts were brief, impersonal. "Thank you for your kind thoughts. Give my regards to your family." But Newland read them obsessively, searching for hidden meaning in every word. Then, in early April, May announced news that changed everything. "Ellen is coming back to New York," she said one morning over breakfast, reading from a letter. "She says Washington was lovely, but she belongs here with family." "Isn't that wonderful?" Newland's coffee cup clattered against the saucer. "When? Next week, it seems. Oh, I'm so glad. I've missed her terribly." May looked up, her face glowing. "We should plan something special to welcome her home. A dinner party, perhaps." The next week passed in a strange suspension. Newland moved through his days mechanically, his mind constantly reaching forward to the moment when he would see Ellen again. What would he say? How would he behave? Would the months apart have changed anything, or would he feel the same devastating pull? When the day came, a warm April evening when the Archer family hosted a dinner to welcome Ellen back, Newland dressed with particular care, then berated himself for the vanity. May noticed and kissed his cheek. "You look very handsome," she said. "Ellen will be pleased to see us so happy." The words cut like glass. Ellen arrived late, flushed from the journey, wearing a simple dress in a pale green that made her look young and vulnerable. She greeted everyone warmly, kissed May, thanked Newland and his mother for their hospitality. She seemed changed, quieter than before, but also somehow more settled, as though the distance had given her perspective. Throughout dinner, Newland watched her covertly. She spoke little but listened intently to others. When their eyes met accidentally across the table, she smiled slightly and looked away. Nothing in her manner suggested the intimate conversation they'd had before she left. Nothing acknowledged what lay between them. It was as though Washington had erased it all. After dinner, while the other guests chatted in the drawing room, Newland found himself briefly alone with Ellen on the terrace. The night was warm, the garden below fragrant with early blooms. "Washington agreed with you," he said, for lack of anything better. "It gave me distance," Ellen replied. "Time to think clearly." "And what did you think about?" She turned to face him, and in the lamplight from the windows, he could see the strain in her face, the shadows under her eyes. About how to live with impossible situations. How to survive loving someone you can never have. His breath caught. "Ellen, let me finish, please." She took a breath. "I thought about going back to Europe, to the Count. He's written again, offering reconciliation. His lawyers say he's changed, that he wants me back, that he'll provide a generous settlement and freedom to live as I please." "You can't be serious." Horror flooded through him. "You can't go back to him. Not after everything." "Why not? What do I have here?" I can't have you. I can't have a real life of my own. I'm living on charity, on the family's tolerance, existing in the margins of other people's happiness." Her voice was steady but strained. "At least in Europe, I'd have position, resources. The Count is willing to publicly forgive me, to make me welcome in his household again. His household where he was cruel to you, where he kept mistresses and humiliated you." Newland struggled to keep his voice low. "You'd go back to that. I wouldn't have to see you married to someone else," she said simply. "I wouldn't have to watch you and May and pretend to be happy about it. I wouldn't have to live with the daily knowledge that what I want most in the world is 6 blocks away and might as well be on the moon." "Don't do this," he said desperately. "Ellen, please stay in New York. We'll find a way to bear it. We managed before." "Did we, or were we both slowly destroying ourselves?" She brushed at her eyes impatiently. "I've tried, Newland. I tried Washington. I've tried being dutiful and proper and accepting my lot, but it doesn't work. The pain doesn't fade. If anything, it gets worse. And I'm tired. I'm so tired of hurting all the time." "Then let's stop pretending." The words came out before he could stop them. "Let's admit what we feel. Let's find a way to be together, truly together. I'll leave May. We'll go away, start over somewhere new." Ellen stared at him, and for a moment, hope flared in her eyes. Then it died, replaced by something like pity. "You don't mean that." "I do," he insisted. "Ellen, I love you. I should have said it months ago, years ago. I love you, and I can't bear the thought of you going back to that man." "And May? What about her? May would be, she'd survive. She's young. She'd find someone else, someone better suited." "Someone better suited than the man she loves." Ellen shook her head. "You're not thinking clearly. You're imagining some romantic escape where we ride off together and live happily somewhere distant and exotic. But that's not how it would work. We'd ruin May. We'd scandalize both families. Your career would be destroyed. We'd have to leave New York, leave America probably, and everywhere we went we'd carry the guilt of what we'd done. Every happy moment between us would be shadowed by the knowledge of what it cost." "I don't care," he said, though he knew, even as he said it, that it wasn't entirely true. "Yes, you do. You care very much. You're an honorable man, Newland. It's one of the reasons I love you, but it's also the reason we can't do this. You'd hate yourself. You'd hate me eventually for being the cause of your fall." She was right. He knew she was right, but the knowing didn't make it easier. "Then what do we do?" he asked helplessly. "You stay here and we're both miserable. You go back to the Count and I spend the rest of my life wondering if you're safe, if you're happy, if you're even alive." "I don't know," Ellen admitted. "I don't have answers. I just know that every option is terrible and I'm trying to choose the least terrible one." They stood in silence, the sounds of the party drifting out from the drawing room, laughter, music, the clink of glasses. Normal life continuing indifferent to their private anguish. "Don't go back to him," Newland said finally. "Whatever you decide, promise me you won't go back to the Count. I couldn't survive knowing you were there with him." Ellen looked at him for a long moment. "I promise," she whispered. "I won't go back." The relief was overwhelming. He wanted to take her in his arms, to thank her, to make 1,000 other promises. But May's voice called from inside. "Newland, where did you go? We're starting the music." Reality intruded, as it always did. Newland and Ellen returned to the drawing room separately. He stood beside May, listening to a young cousin play piano, feeling Ellen's presence across the room like a magnetic pull. And he understood in that moment that this was the pattern they were condemned to: endless proximity, endless restraint, endlessly wanting what they could never have. Ellen would stay in New York. She wouldn't go back to the Count, but neither would she have Newland. They would see each other at family gatherings, exchange polite words, maintain the careful fiction that they were merely cousins by marriage. And perhaps over time the pain would dull. Perhaps they would learn to live with it, the way one learns to live with an old injury that aches in certain weather. Or perhaps they would simply endure year after year, carrying the secret knowledge that they had loved and lost, not because of death or distance, but because of duty, propriety, and the impossible weight of caring more about others' happiness than their own. For weeks after Ellen's return, Newland lived in a state of constant tension. Seeing her at family gatherings, exchanging careful pleasantries, maintaining the charade, it was wearing him down. He felt like a man walking a tightrope, one misstep away from disaster. May seemed to notice nothing. She chatted about household matters, planned summer trips to Newport, discussed dinner menus with the cook. Her world was orderly, pleasant, uncomplicated. She had no idea that her husband was slowly coming apart at the seams. Then one evening in early May, Ellen mentioned at a family dinner that she was planning to visit old Mrs. Mingot at her cottage in Skuytercliff the following afternoon. She would take the boat up the Hudson, spend the day, return by evening. Newland heard the information and felt something shift inside him. An entire day. Ellen would be alone, or relatively alone, away from the watchful eyes of New York society. Away from May, away from everything that kept them carefully separated. He began to plan without quite admitting to himself what he was planning. He told May the next morning that he had business upstate, that he wouldn't be home until late. She kissed him goodbye absently, already consulting with the housekeeper about some domestic matter. He took the morning train north, his heart pounding with anticipation and guilt. He knew what he was doing was wrong. He knew that even seeking a private conversation with Ellen was a betrayal of May's trust. But he couldn't help himself. The need to see her, to speak to her alone, was overwhelming every rule he'd ever lived by. He arrived at Skuytercliff in the early afternoon. The Mingot cottage, actually a sprawling mansion, sat on a bluff overlooking the river. The grounds were beautifully maintained, with gardens that swept down to the water. Newland left his hired carriage at the gate and walked up the drive, rehearsing what he would say. But when he reached the house, the butler informed him that Mrs. Mingot was napping and Countess Olenska had gone walking in the grounds. "Which way?" Newland asked. "Toward the river, I believe, sir." Newland found her sitting on a bench near the water's edge, a book forgotten in her lap, staring out at the Hudson. She wore a white dress, and the breeze lifted her dark hair. She looked like something from a painting, beautiful and unreachable. She heard his footsteps on the gravel path and turned. For a moment, surprise and something like joy crossed her face. Then she schooled her expression into polite inquiry. "Newland, what are you doing here? I had business nearby." The lie felt heavy on his tongue. "I thought I'd pay my respects to your grandmother. She's sleeping. Then I'll pay my respects to you instead." Ellen looked at him steadily. "You shouldn't have come. I know." He sat beside her on the bench, leaving a proper distance between them but feeling the electricity of her nearness. "I couldn't help it." "You have to help it," Ellen said, but her voice was gentle, sad. "We both do. We agreed in this is the line we have to hold." "I don't want to hold any lines. I want to stop pretending." "Ellen, we could leave today, right now. We could get on a boat, go to California, to Europe, anywhere. We could be together. And May, your family, your career, your entire life." Ellen shook her head. "You're not thinking about the reality. You're thinking about romance, about escape. But there is no escape, Newland, not really. Wherever we went, we'd carry our guilt with us." "I don't care about guilt." "Yes, you do. You care desperately. You're one of the most honorable men I've ever known. It's torturing you, this conflict between what you want and what you believe is right. If we actually ran away together, that torture would never end. You'd regret it, and you'd blame me." "I wouldn't. You would." She turned to look at him fully. "You think you wouldn't, but you would. Every time you thought of May's face when she learned of our betrayal. Every time someone cut us socially. Every time you couldn't practice law or hold your head up among decent people. All those small humiliations and large losses, they'd accumulate, and eventually you'd look at me and think, this is what I gave up everything for, and the love would curdle into resentment." "You're wrong," he said, but he heard the uncertainty in his own voice. "Am I? Tell me honestly, could you really abandon May? Sweet, trusting May who loves you completely. Could you look her in the face and say, I'm leaving you for your cousin? Could you destroy her like that?" He thought of May, her innocent eyes, her trusting smile, her total faith in him. He thought of the life they'd built, the promises he'd made. And he knew with devastating clarity that Ellen was right. He couldn't do it, not really. Not when it came down to the actual moment of choosing. He was too much his father's son, too much a product of his world. Honor mattered, duty mattered. Other people's happiness mattered more than his own desires. "No," he whispered, "I couldn't." "I know," Ellen said softly, "and I love you for that, even though it means we can't be together. Your honor, your decency, those are the qualities that make you who you are. If you betrayed them, you'd stop being the man I love." They sat in silence, watching the river flow past, steady and indifferent. A bird called from the trees. The wind rippled through the grass. The world continued, beautiful and cruel. "What do we do?" Newland asked finally. "We do what people have done for centuries. We endure. We make the best of what we have." We find meaning in duty instead of passion. Ellen's voice wavered slightly. We grow old and tired and perhaps, eventually, we stop hurting quite so much. That's no kind of life. It's the only kind available to us. Newland felt something breaking inside him, some last hope, some final resistance. Ellen was right. She'd been right all along. There was no escape, no solution, no way to have what they wanted without destroying everything and everyone around them. "I should go," he said, standing abruptly, "before your grandmother wakes. Before anyone sees me here and wonders." Ellen stood too, and for a moment they faced each other, close enough to touch but not touching. The space between them felt charged with everything they couldn't say, couldn't do, couldn't have. "Newland," Ellen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "In another life, in another world—" "Don't," he interrupted. "Please don't. I can't bear thinking about other lives when this is the only one we have." She nodded, blinking back tears. "Goodbye then, not goodbye. We'll see each other again. At dinners, gatherings, we'll keep playing the roles." "Yes, the roles." Ellen managed a weak smile. "We've become very good at them, haven't we?" Too good, he thought. So good that sometimes he couldn't remember anymore who he really was beneath the performance. He left her there by the river and walked back to the house, back to the hired carriage, back to the train that would carry him to New York and May and the life he had chosen, or that had chosen him. On the journey home, he stared out the window at the passing landscape and felt the weight of inevitability settling over him like a shroud. This was his life now. This was all it would ever be. A good life by any conventional measure, successful, respectable, comfortable, just not his own. When he arrived home, May was in the drawing room arranging flowers. She looked up with a smile. "How was your business?" "Concluded satisfactorily," he said, the lie coming easily now. "I'm glad. Mrs. Van der Leyden called while you were out. She's invited us to dinner next Thursday. And I thought we might summer in Newport this year instead of the usual house. What do you think?" He thought of Ellen, sitting alone by the river. He thought of the life he'd just walked away from. He thought of all the years stretching ahead, years of dinner invitations and summer houses and careful pretense. "Newport sounds perfect," he said. May beamed and returned to her flowers. And Newland stood there, watching his wife arrange roses in a crystal vase, feeling like a ghost in his own life, present but not really there, going through the motions while his heart remained elsewhere, with a woman he could never have, dreaming of a life he would never live. Summer came, and with it the annual migration to Newport. The Archer house there was smaller than their New York residence, but beautifully situated near the ocean. The days fell into a pleasant rhythm, morning walks on the beach, afternoon calls, evening parties. The cream of New York society gathered here each summer, and the social obligations were endless. Newland went through the motions automatically. He sailed. He played tennis. He attended dinners and dances. He was the perfect young husband, attentive to May, cordial to their friends, fulfilling every expectation. Inside, he felt hollow, empty, as though the visit to Skuytercliff had taken something essential from him and left only a shell walking around in his skin. Ellen had remained in New York. She claimed the heat agreed with her better than Newport's sea air, but Newland suspected the real reason. She was giving him space, removing the temptation. It was kind of her. It was torture. They'd been in Newport for 3 weeks when May asked him to walk with her on the beach one evening after dinner. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Other couples strolled along the sand. It was romantic, picturesque, everything a young marriage should be. May took his arm and leaned close. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice soft with excitement. "Something wonderful." He looked down at her sweet face glowing with happiness, and felt a premonition of disaster, though he couldn't have said why. "I'm expecting a baby," May said. "I've suspected for a few weeks, but now I'm certain. We're going to be parents, Newland." The world seemed to stop. The sound of the waves faded. Everything narrowed to May's face, her joyful expectation, her complete trust that he would share her happiness. "A baby," he repeated numbly. "Yes. Isn't it wonderful? I know it's sooner than we planned, but I'm so happy." "Are you happy?" He should be. A child was a blessing, the next natural step in their marriage, something to be celebrated and anticipated, but all he could think was, "Now I'm truly trapped, forever." "Of course I'm happy," he said, pulling her into an embrace so she wouldn't see his face. "It's wonderful news, May, truly." She hugged him tightly, laughing with delight. "I was afraid you might think it was too soon, but Mother says the first year is the best time before one gets too set in married life. And a baby will make everything perfect. Our family, our home, everything perfect." That word again, like a cage door slamming shut. That night, Newland couldn't sleep. He lay beside May in the darkness, listening to her peaceful breathing, and felt panic rising in his throat. A child meant permanence. It meant he could never leave, never choose differently, never even entertain the fantasy of another life. He was bound now, absolutely and irrevocably, to this marriage, this life, this future. The next morning, May made another announcement. "I wrote to Ellen yesterday, telling her our news, and I've invited her to come to Newport for a visit. Won't that be lovely? She can help me plan the nursery." "You invited Ellen?" Newland tried to keep his voice neutral. "Yes. She's family, and I want her to share our happiness. Besides, she's been alone in hot New York all summer. It will do her good to have the sea air." May smiled innocently. "I thought we might have a dinner party to celebrate. Just family and close friends. Would Thursday suit?" Newland realized with creeping horror what May was doing, perhaps without even knowing it. She was gathering the family, broadcasting the news of her pregnancy, making it official and public. And she was bringing Ellen here to hear it, to witness his final, complete surrender to domestic life. "Thursday is fine," he said. Ellen arrived 3 days later. Newland saw her at dinner that first evening and felt the familiar jolt of recognition, longing, pain. She looked thinner, tired. The summer in New York had clearly not agreed with her. But she smiled at May, congratulated her warmly on the coming baby, and behaved throughout the evening with perfect propriety. Only once did Newland catch her alone, for just a moment on the terrace while the other guests were assembling for the party. "Ellen," he said quietly, "you didn't have to come. May invited me. How could I refuse?" She looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes. "And I wanted to see for myself, to make it real." "Make what real?" "The end. Your life with May, your family, your future. It's all decided now. The baby changes everything. I know. No more fantasies of escape, no more impossible dreams." Her voice was gentle, almost relieved. "We're both free now, in a way. Free of the illusion that we could ever choose differently. That doesn't sound like freedom. It's the only kind we're going to get." She touched his hand briefly, a fleeting contact. "Be happy, Newland. Or if not happy, then at least at peace. You're going to be a father. That's something good. Let it be good." Before he could respond, May appeared, taking Ellen's arm with affectionate enthusiasm. "There you both are. Come inside, we're about to start." The dinner party was elegant and warm. May sat at the head of the table, radiant with her secret, waiting for the right moment to share it. Newland sat beside her, playing his role, while Ellen sat farther down, between an elderly uncle and a family friend. After the main course, May stood, her glass raised. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Newland and I are so grateful to be surrounded by family and friends, and we have some news to share, happy news." She glanced at Newland, inviting him to stand beside her. He did, his hand finding hers automatically. "We're expecting a baby," May announced, her voice full of joy. "This spring, God willing, we'll be parents." The table erupted in congratulations. Women rushed to embrace May. Men clapped Newland on the back, offering cigars and advice. It was everything such a moment should be, celebratory, joyful, full of good wishes. And through it all, Newland's eyes found Ellen's across the room. She was smiling, applauding with the others, but her eyes held everything they couldn't say. Goodbye. "I love you, this is the end." Later, when the party had ended and the guests departed, May leaned against him contentedly. "It was perfect, wasn't it? Everyone was so happy for us." "Perfect," Newland agreed. "Did you see Ellen's face? She looked almost tearful. I think the news moved her. She's so sensitive, poor thing, so alone." The words cut him. Ellen was alone because she'd chosen honor over happiness. She was alone because she'd refused to destroy May, to ruin Newland's life, to take what she wanted at the expense of others' pain. She was alone because she'd loved him enough to let him go. "Yes," he said quietly. "She is alone. We must take care of her," May said, snuggling closer. "Make sure she's included, that she knows she's loved." "Of course." That night, Newland stood at the window of their bedroom, looking out at the dark ocean. May slept peacefully behind him, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. In a few months, there would be a child. a son or daughter who would bind him to this life months past. Ellen left Newport after a week, returning to New York. May bloomed with her pregnancy, growing more beautiful as her body changed. The family rallied around them, offering advice and support. Old Mrs. Mingott was particularly delighted, a great-grandchild to spoil and fuss over. And Newland settled into his role as expectant father. He prepared the nursery. He consulted doctors. He read books about child-rearing. He did everything that was expected. But a part of him had gone silent, retreated somewhere deep where no one could reach it. The part that had dreamed, that had questioned, that had wanted something more than this prescribed existence, that part had been carefully locked away. It was the only way to survive. And when, in early winter, May went into labor, and after long hours delivered a healthy baby boy, Newland held his son and felt wonder mixed with grief. Wonder at this perfect small life, this continuation of the family line. Grief for the man he might have been, the life he might have lived, the woman he had loved and lost. But he kissed May's forehead, thanked her for their son, and vowed silently to be the best father he could be. To give this child the life he deserved, even if it meant Newland buried his own desires forever. It was, after all, what honorable men did, what his father had done, what generations of archers had done before him, and so he would do it too, for May, for his son, for everyone except himself. It was spring when Ellen made the announcement. Newland's son was 6 months old, a healthy, cheerful baby whom May doted on endlessly. Their home was full of nurses and baby equipment, the routines of family life firmly established. Newland had settled into fatherhood with the same dutiful competence he brought to everything, attentive, responsible, present in body if not always in spirit. Ellen had stayed away during the winter months, pleading a cold that kept her indoors. But as the weather warmed, she began appearing at family gatherings again. She was always gracious, always appropriate, always careful to maintain the safe distance between herself and Newland. Then one evening at Mrs. Mingott's, Ellen revealed her decision. "I've been thinking," she said to the assembled family, "about returning to Europe. Not to the Count," she added quickly, seeing the alarm on several faces. "Never to him. But to Paris to live independently. I have the means now and old friends who have invited me. I think it's time." The announcement fell like a stone into still water. Everyone spoke at once, Mrs. Mingott protesting, May expressing concern, various aunts and cousins offering opinions. Ellen listened patiently to all of it, but her expression remained resolute. "It's decided," she said finally. "I sail in 2 weeks. I wanted you all to know." Newland said nothing. He couldn't trust his voice. Ellen leaving, going to Paris, to a new life, removing herself permanently from his orbit, it was what she should do, what was best for everyone. But the thought of her gone, unreachable, living her life thousands of miles away, was devastating. After the initial commotion died down, May turned to Newland with that sweet, thoughtful look she'd perfected. "We should give Ellen a farewell dinner. Something intimate, just close family. What do you think?" "Whatever you think best," Newland managed, and so it was arranged. A small dinner party at the Archer house 10 days before Ellen's departure. Only the immediate family would attend, Mrs. Mingott, the Wellens, a few cousins. A quiet celebration of Ellen's new adventure, they called it, though everyone present understood it was really a goodbye. The days leading up to the dinner were a kind of torture for Newland. He knew he would see Ellen one more time, knew they would have to maintain their careful pretense, knew that afterward she would be gone. Truly, finally gone. He considered writing her a letter, pouring out everything he'd never been able to say. But what would be the point? It would only make the parting harder, more painful. Better to maintain the silence they'd cultivated for so long. The evening of the dinner arrived. May had arranged everything beautifully, flowers on the table, the good china, candles creating a warm glow. She wore a pale blue dress that complemented her coloring, and she moved through the preparations with calm efficiency, the perfect hostess. Ellen arrived early, looking elegant in black silk. She brought gifts, a silver rattle for the baby, a first edition of poetry for Newland, embroidered handkerchiefs for May. Her generosity was painful to witness, every gesture an act of farewell. Dinner was pleasant, the conversation flowing easily. They discussed Ellen's plans, the apartment she'd rented in Paris, the museum she would visit, the friends who were eager to see her. She painted a picture of a full, rich life awaiting her, and perhaps it was true. Perhaps leaving New York and all its constraints would finally allow her to be happy. Newland hoped so. He hoped it desperately, even as his heart broke. After dinner, while the others lingered over coffee in the drawing room, Newland stepped out onto the small terrace for air. The spring night was mild, fragrant with blooming flowers from the garden below. He stood there alone, breathing deeply, trying to compose himself for the rest of the evening. He heard the door open behind him and knew, without turning, that it was Ellen. "I wondered if I might find you here," she said softly, coming to stand beside him at the railing. "You shouldn't have followed me out here. Someone might see." "Let them see. I'm leaving in a week." "What does it matter anymore?" He turned to look at her. In the lamplight spilling from the windows, her face was pale but calm, resigned to what must be. "Ellen," he began, but she held up a hand. "Please, let me speak first. I need to say this, and if you interrupt, I won't have the courage to continue." He nodded, unable to speak anyway. "I want you to know," Ellen continued, her voice low and steady, "that these past 2 years, knowing you, loving you, it's been the most real thing in my life. Everything else, my marriage, my travels, all of it, feels like shadow compared to what I've felt for you. Even though we could never be together, even though we had to hide it and deny it and pretend it didn't exist, it was real. It mattered. It changed me." "Ellen," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not expecting you to say or do anything differently. I just wanted you to know. Before I go, before we never see each other again, I wanted you to know that you were loved, truly, completely, hopelessly loved." Tears burned behind his eyes. "As you were loved by me. As you are loved." They stood there, close but not touching, letting the words hang in the air between them like a benediction. "Do you think," Ellen asked after a moment, "that in some other world, some other life we're together? That there's a version of us who chose differently, who got to be happy?" "I hope so," Newland said. "I hope somewhere we're living the life we were meant to have. That's a comforting thought." She smiled through tears. "I'll hold on to it. When I'm lonely in Paris, when I wonder if I made the right choices, I'll imagine that other world, that other us, and I'll be glad for them." As will I. They heard voices from inside, someone looking for them. The spell of privacy was about to break. "I should go back in," Ellen said. "Not yet." Newland caught her hand, held it for just a moment. "Ellen, be happy, please. Build a good life in Paris. Find friends, purpose, joy. Don't spend your life looking backward. I'll try. And you raise your son, love May as best you can, be the man you were meant to be, even if it's not the life you would have chosen. It's the life I did choose." "No," Ellen said gently. "It's the life that chose you, that chose us both, but we can still make something good from it. We have to try." The door opened and May appeared, smiling. "There you are. We were wondering where you'd gone. Ellen, you must come see the photographs from our last summer in Newport. There are some lovely ones." Ellen squeezed Newland's hand once quickly, then released it and turned to May. "I'd love to see them." The two women went inside together, arm in arm, cousins and friends, united in affection that was genuine even though it existed alongside the unspoken truth. Newland remained on the terrace a moment longer, breathing the spring air, feeling the weight of finality settle over him. This was goodbye. In a few days, Ellen would board a ship for Europe. She would sail away from his life, and he would let her go because it was the right thing to do, the honorable thing, the only thing. When he finally went back inside, the party was breaking up. Guests were gathering their things, calling for carriages. Ellen was making her farewells, kissing cheeks, accepting promises to write, offering assurances that she would visit someday, though everyone knew she probably wouldn't. At the door, she turned back to look at Newland one last time. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, across the distance that would always exist between them now. A whole conversation happened in that glance. "I love you. I release you. Goodbye. Thank you. I'm sorry. Forgive me." Then she smiled, small and sad and final, and stepped out into the night. Newland stood in his hallway, surrounded by family, listening to the sound of her carriage pulling away. May was already upstairs, checking on the baby. The servants were clearing the dinner dishes. Life was continuing, moving forward, indifferent to his private devastation. 1 week later, Ellen Olenska sailed for Paris. Newland didn't go to the pier to see her off. It would have been improper, and by then he'd become an expert in propriety. May read him the letter that came a few weeks later. Ellen had arrived safely, found her apartment lovely, was settling in well. She sent her love to everyone. "I'm so glad she's happy," May said, folding the letter carefully. "She deserves happiness after everything she's been through." "Yes," Newland agreed, "she does," and he truly meant it. Even as his heart remained in that yellow house on an unfashionable street, on a terrace overlooking a garden, in all the places where he'd caught glimpses of the life he might have lived. Ellen was gone. That chapter was closed. All that remained was the long, dutiful present and a future that looked exactly like every day that had come before. 26 years passed. 26 years of dutiful, respectable, predictable life. Newland Archer became exactly what everyone had always expected him to become: a successful lawyer, a devoted father, a pillar of New York society. His hair went gray at the temples, then white. His face acquired the distinguished lines of middle age, then the deeper creases of approaching old age. There were 3 children eventually, the first son, then a daughter, then another son. May raised them with the same sweet competence she brought to everything. They had summers in Newport, winters in town, trips to Europe when the children were old enough. It was a good life by any conventional measure, a life many would envy. And Newland moved through it with practiced ease, playing his role so well that sometimes even he forgot it was a role. He went to his office each day. He handled estates and trusts and property transfers. He made sensible investments. He provided for his family. He was reliable, trustworthy, exactly the man his father had been. The children grew. His eldest son went to Harvard, then entered politics. His daughter married well, a young man from an old Philadelphia family. His youngest was still at university, studying architecture. They were good children, well-raised, a credit to their parents. May remained much as she had always been, pleasant, conventional, content with her life. There was a comfort in her consistency, Newland supposed. She never questioned, never probed beneath surfaces, never asked him if he was happy. Perhaps she assumed he was. Perhaps she truly didn't want to know. They settled into the comfortable companionship of long marriage. They had their routines, reading in the evening, hosting the same dinner parties for the friends, taking the same trips. May no longer blushed at his compliments, and Newland no longer felt the need to give them. They existed together peacefully, like 2 people sharing a house divided into separate, tidy rooms. Sometimes, late at night when he couldn't sleep, Newland would think of Ellen. He wondered where she was, what her life had been like in Paris. She had written to the family occasionally in the early years, brief letters describing her life, her friends, her contentment. Then the letters had grown less frequent and finally stopped altogether. She had, it seemed, built a new life entirely separate from New York. He was glad for her. He was. But sometimes he wondered if she ever thought of him. If she remembered those afternoons in the yellow house, the stolen glances across crowded rooms, the words they'd never quite been able to say. If she looked back on that time with the same mixture of tenderness and regret that he did. Then May's illness came. It started quietly, a persistent cough, fatigue, loss of appetite. The doctors diagnosed it as pneumonia, assured them it was manageable. But May, always delicate despite her robust appearance, weakened quickly. Within 3 months, she was gone. The funeral was well attended. Everyone spoke of what a lovely person she had been, so kind, so devoted to her family, so exemplary in every way. And it was all true. May had been genuinely good, genuinely sweet. She had loved Newland in her own limited, uncomplicated way. She had been a faithful wife and a loving mother, and Newland mourned her sincerely. Not with the passionate grief of a deep love lost, but with genuine sorrow for a kind person gone, for the end of a long partnership, for the closing of a chapter. "Mother was perfect," his daughter said at the funeral, weeping. "She was always so good." And Newland nodded, because it was true, and because there was nothing to be gained from complicating that truth with thoughts of what else might have been. After May's death, his children tried to care for him. They visited often, urged him to travel, to take up hobbies, to stay active. They worried he would be lonely in the large house without May, but Newland found he didn't mind the solitude. It was peaceful in a way. He could read late into the night without worrying about disturbing anyone. He could skip dinner if he wasn't hungry. He could sit in his library with a book and a glass of port and let his mind wander where it would. It was during one of those quiet evenings, a year after May's death, that his eldest son Dallas came to visit him. Dallas was 33 now, trim and confident in a way that reminded Newland of himself at that age, but with less constraint. This new generation seemed freer, less bound by the old rules. Dallas had married for love, traveled widely, held progressive opinions. He was, Newland thought with some amusement, the man Newland might have wanted to be. "Father," Dallas said, settling into the chair across from him. "I've been talking with Mother's cousin, you know, Countess Olenska." Newland's heart stopped. He forced his expression to remain neutral. "Ellen, I didn't realize you were acquainted." "Well, I wasn't really, not until recently. I'm going to Paris on business next month, and I mentioned it to Aunt Mingot before she died. She gave me Ellen's address, said I should call on her." Dallas looked at his father thoughtfully. "I wrote to her and she wrote back, invited me to visit. And then she asked if you might come too, to Paris." With me, the room seemed to tilt. Ellen asking to see him after all these years. "She's almost 70 now," Dallas continued. "Still living in the same apartment in the Faubourg Saint-Germain, apparently. She's become quite a fixture in artistic circles there, knows all sorts of interesting people. Writers, painters, musicians." Newland tried to imagine it. Ellen at 70, white-haired but still vital, still curious, living the life she'd carved out for herself. It made him smile despite the ache in his chest. "Will you come?" Dallas asked. "It would mean a lot to her, I think. Mother's gone now, there's no reason not to. Mother's gone now, there's no reason not to." The words hung in the air, carrying more weight than Dallas could possibly know. For 26 years, Newland had honored his commitment to May. He had been faithful, had never sought Ellen out, had maintained the careful distance honor demanded. But May was gone, the obligation was released. He could go to Paris, he could see Ellen. He could, after a lifetime of denial, choose what he wanted instead of what was expected. "When do you leave?" he heard himself ask. 3 weeks. "We'd spend a month or so traveling Paris, then maybe Rome, Venice. You haven't been abroad in years, Father. It would do you good." Newland thought about it. Imagined boarding the ship, crossing the Atlantic, arriving in Paris. Imagined standing outside Ellen's apartment, climbing the stairs, knocking on her door. Imagined seeing her face after all these years. And then he thought about the reality. They were both old now. Whatever passion they'd felt had been banked by time and distance. They would be strangers, connected only by memories of people they no longer were. The Ellen he'd loved was 27, vital and rebellious and full of fire. The woman in Paris was nearly 70, with her own life, her own memories, her own sorrows. Could he bear to see her as an old woman? Could he bear to let her see him as an old man? Would it tarnish the perfect, impossible memory they'd both protected for so long? "I'll think about it," Newland said finally. Dallas smiled, satisfied. "Good. I really think you should come, Father. Life's too short to pass up chances like this." After Dallas left, Newland sat in his library for a long time, looking at nothing, thinking about Ellen in Paris. About the life she'd lived without him, the choices she'd made, the person she'd become. He thought about May, patient and sweet, who had never known about the love he'd carried for another woman through their entire marriage. He thought about duty and honor and all the sacrifices he'd made in their names. And he thought about that young man in the Academy of Music, 30 years ago, who had seen a woman across a crowded theater and felt his whole world shift. What would that young man have done? What would he have wanted? But Newland was no longer that young man. He was 63 years old, with gray hair and a lifetime of careful choices behind him. And he already knew, though he hadn't admitted it yet, what his decision would be. Still, he went through the motions of considering. He let Dallas make arrangements. He told his daughter he was thinking of traveling. He even had his man pack a trunk, but in his heart, he knew. He'd spent 57 years being Newland Archer, dutiful son, faithful husband, responsible father. That was who he was. That was who he would remain. Some chances, once passed, could never be reclaimed. Some doors once closed, stayed closed. Ellen was in Paris, living her life. He was in New York, living his. And perhaps that was how it was always meant to be. And yet, when the time came, Newland went to Paris. He couldn't explain exactly why, even to himself. Perhaps it was Dallas' enthusiasm, his assumption that of course his father would come. Perhaps it was the simple restlessness of grief, the desire to escape the house that still echoed with May's gentle presence. Perhaps it was the knowledge that this was his last chance. If he didn't go now, he never would. Or perhaps, after a lifetime of doing what was expected, he simply wanted to do one thing for himself. Even if he didn't know yet what that thing would be, the journey was pleasant. Dallas was good company, energetic and full of plans. They toured museums in Paris, dined at famous restaurants, walked along the Seine. Newland observed it all with the slightly detached interest of a man seeing a city he'd visited before, long ago, when he'd been young and on his honeymoon with May. Paris had changed, or he had changed, or both. Dallas had written ahead to Ellen, mentioning that his father was with him. She had replied warmly, inviting them both to call on her on a specific afternoon. The appointment was set for 3 o'clock on a Thursday. The day arrived bright and warm, a perfect spring afternoon. Dallas was eager, excited to meet this legendary relative he'd heard about but never really known. He chattered as they made their way through the right bank streets, talking about Ellen's apartment building, her neighborhood, the interesting people she knew. Newland barely heard him. His heart was pounding as though he were 27 again, walking to the yellow house for the first time, drawn by something he couldn't name and couldn't resist. They arrived at the address, a beautiful old building in the Faubourg Saint-Germain, elegant and discreet. The kind of place where minor nobility and cultivated Americans lived gracefully on modest incomes. The porter directed them to the 3rd floor. Dallas started up the stairs, but Newland stopped on the street, looking up at the building. One of the windows on the 3rd floor stood open, a gauze curtain moving in the breeze. Was that her apartment? Was she there now, perhaps looking down, perhaps watching for them? "Father, are you coming?" Newland looked at his son, so young, so free of the burdens that had shaped his own life. Dallas hadn't lived through the old New York, the rigid codes, the impossible choices. He would go up those stairs without hesitation, would greet Ellen warmly, would see only a charming elderly lady with interesting stories. He wouldn't see the woman Newland had loved for 30 years. The woman who had represented everything he'd wanted and everything he'd given up. The woman whose absence had shaped his entire life as powerfully as May's presence. And suddenly Newland knew he couldn't go up those stairs. "You go," he said to Dallas. "Give her my regards. Tell her I'm tired from the walking, that I'll wait here." Dallas looked puzzled. "But father, we came all this way." "She's expecting you." "I know, but I'd rather not. Please, Dallas, go ahead, take your time. I'll wait here on this bench." "Are you ill? Should I call a doctor?" No, I just need to rest a moment." "Really?" "Go on." Dallas hesitated, clearly uncertain, but his eagerness to meet Ellen won out. "If you're sure, I won't be too long." "Stay as long as you like. I'm comfortable here." Newland watched his son climb the stairs and disappear into the building. Then he settled onto the bench across the street, in the shade of a chestnut tree just coming into leaf. He sat there for perhaps 20 minutes, perhaps longer. He watched people pass, a nursemaid with a child, an old man with a dog, lovers walking arm in arm. He heard the sounds of Paris, carriage wheels on cobblestones, vendors calling, distant music from an open window. And he looked up at that open window on the 3rd floor, imagining Ellen behind it. Was her hair white now, like his? Did she wear spectacles when she read? Had age been kind to her, or had it carved her features with the same disappointments and compromises that marked his own face? He would never know, and somehow that was right. Because the Ellen he had loved, really loved, was the woman in the yellow house with firelight on her dark hair. The woman on a terrace in Newport, whispering goodbye. The woman whose image he'd carried through his entire marriage like a talisman, perfect and unchanging. That woman existed only in memory, and memory, he was beginning to understand, was its own kind of truth. More real, perhaps, than the reality of 2 elderly people making polite conversation in a Paris apartment, trying to bridge 30 years of separation and silence. He thought of all the times he'd imagined this moment, walking into her apartment, seeing her face, taking her hands, saying all the things he'd never been able to say, perhaps confessing that he'd loved her every day of his married life, perhaps asking if she'd done the same. But what would that confession accomplish now? They were old. May was dead. The Count was probably dead too. The entire world they'd navigated so carefully had changed beyond recognition. The very thing they'd sacrificed themselves to protect, society's rigid codes, the sanctity of marriage vows, the importance of appearance over truth, all of it was crumbling, made irrelevant by time and change. His son's generation didn't live by those rules. Dallas would marry whom he wanted, live where he chose, care very little about what others thought. He had that freedom. But Newland didn't regret his own choices. Not exactly. He had lived honorably. He had been faithful to May, had raised his children well, had kept his promises. There was value in that, even if it had cost him his heart's desire. And Ellen had built a life in Paris. She had friends, culture, independence. She had become someone, created something, made a space for herself in the world. She didn't need him appearing now, an old ghost from a past life, disturbing the peace she'd found. Better to leave the memory intact. Better to keep Ellen as she was in his mind, young, vital, impossibly dear. Better to let this sleeping love lie undisturbed. The sun shifted, casting new shadows across the street. A window on the third floor closed, the one Ellen's. He didn't know. Eventually Dallas emerged from the building looking thoughtful and charmed. "Father, she's wonderful, so elegant, so cultured. She told the most fascinating stories about the artists and writers she knows. You should have come up. She was disappointed you weren't feeling well." What did she say? When you told her I wasn't coming, Dallas thought. She said, "I understand. Please give him my warmest regards." And then she stood at the window for a while, looking down. "I think she was hoping you might change your mind." Newland felt his throat tighten. So she had been at that window. Had looked down, had known he was there. Had understood, perhaps, why he stayed on the bench instead of climbing the stairs. "Did she seem happy?" he asked. "Yes, I think genuinely happy. Her apartment is beautiful, full of books and art. She has a terrace with flowers. She spoke warmly of her life here, her friends. She seems... Content, that was enough. That was more than enough." "Good," Newland said, standing slowly, feeling his age in his knees, his back. "I'm glad. She deserves happiness." They walked back through the Paris streets toward their hotel. Dallas chattered about Ellen. The conversation, the apartment, her stories, her invitation for him to return. Newland listened with half an ear, his mind still on that bench, that window, that choice. That night, lying in his hotel room with the sounds of Paris drifting through the open window, Newland thought about the man he had been and the man he had become. He thought about all the roads not taken, all the words not said, all the dreams deferred. And he found, to his surprise, that he was at peace. He had loved Ellen. He still loved her, in the abstract way one loves a cherished memory. But the living, breathing woman in that apartment was not the woman he'd loved. She was older, different, shaped by experiences he hadn't shared. And he was not the man she'd loved either. That eager young lawyer with passionate ideals and secret rebellion. He'd been worn away by years of compromise, duty, routine. They were strangers now, connected only by the ghosts of who they'd been. And ghosts, he realized, were sometimes better left undisturbed. He had sat on that bench outside her building. He had been as close to her as he'd been in 30 years. That was enough. That was, in its own way, a kind of grace. In the morning, Dallas asked if he wanted to call on Ellen again before they left Paris. Newland declined gently, and if Dallas thought it odd, he was too tactful to say so. They left for Italy 2 days later. And Newland left behind, on that bench under the chestnut tree, the last of his impossible dreams. What remained was memory, and gratitude, and the quiet satisfaction of having chosen duty over desire, honor over happiness, and having survived it all with his soul, if not quite intact, then at least his own. It was enough, it had to be, and in a way it was. And so our story comes to rest, like an old book closing gently, its pages worn soft from being held and read and remembered. Newland Archer's journey through the gilded world of old New York has shown us something profound about love, about duty, about the choices we make, and the prices we pay for living honorably in a world that often demands we sacrifice our deepest desires for the sake of appearances and propriety. He had loved Ellen Olenska, truly, deeply, with the kind of love that changes a person from the inside out, that makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself and your world. And she had loved him the same way, completely, impossibly, with a purity of feeling that couldn't be tainted by the fact that it could never be fully expressed or realized. But they had lived in a time and place where love alone was not enough, where other things mattered more, promises made at altars, responsibilities inherited with family names, other people's happiness protected at the cost of your own. They lived in an age where society's rules were not merely suggestions, but iron bars, beautiful and gilded perhaps, but imprisoning nonetheless. They had both chosen duty over desire. Ellen had refused to destroy May's marriage, had gone to Paris rather than stay and tempt them both beyond endurance. Newland had honored his vows, had been faithful to May not just in body, but in the daily acts of kindness and attention that make a marriage work, even when his heart belonged elsewhere. And in doing so, they had saved May from heartbreak, preserved their families from scandal, maintained the ordered world they'd been born into. There was honor in that choice. There was genuine goodness. Even if it came at the cost of their own happiness, even if it meant a lifetime of longing for something just out of reach, always visible but never attainable. Some might call it tragic. Some might say they wasted their lives, that they should have been brave enough to defy convention and claim what they wanted. Consequences be damned. But that judgment comes easily from a distance, from a time when the rules have changed, when individual happiness is valued above all else, when duty and honor seem like quaint relics from a bygone era. Newland and Ellen lived in a different world, one where your family name mattered, where reputation could be destroyed in an afternoon of gossip, where women had few paths to independence and security. And within the constraints of that world, they did the best they could. They loved with restraint, they honored their commitments, they protected the people who depended on them, and if the cost was their own hearts, well, perhaps they believed that cost was worth paying. Consider Newland in his final years, looking back across the landscape of his life. He had been a good husband to May, faithful and kind, even when his heart belonged elsewhere, present at her bedside when she died, genuinely grieving her passing. He had raised 3 children who loved him, who turned out well, whom he was proud of. He had built a successful legal career, contributed to his community, served on boards and committees, upheld the values he'd been taught. He had lived a life of integrity, even if not of passion. Was it enough? Was a life of quiet duty, of small pleasures and carefully managed disappointments worth living? Newland thought so, or at least he made his peace with it. He found meaning in his children's laughter, in good work well done, in books read by firelight on winter evenings. He learned to appreciate the gentle companionship he shared with May, even if it lacked the intensity he'd felt with Ellen. And when he sat on that bench in Paris, looking up at Ellen's window, choosing not to climb those stairs, perhaps that was not cowardice or regret. Perhaps it was wisdom. The wisdom to understand that some things are better left in memory, where they stay perfect and untarnished by time's inevitable erosion. The wisdom to know that the Ellen of his imagination, young, vital, full of fire and honesty, was more real to him than any elderly woman in a Paris apartment could ever be. He had loved an ideal, and ideals, by their very nature, cannot survive the harsh light of reality. They must be kept sacred, protected, preserved in the amber of memory, where they cannot age or disappoint or reveal themselves to be merely human after all. As for Ellen, we can hope she found her peace in Paris, that she built a life of culture and friendship, of art and beauty and intellectual stimulation, that she surrounded herself with people who valued her intelligence, her honesty, her courage, that she had moments of genuine happiness, evenings of laughter with bohemian friends, mornings of contentment with a book and coffee in her sunny apartment, afternoons wandering museums and galleries, absorbing the beauty she'd always hungered for, that she too looked back on her love for Newland, not with bitterness, but with a kind of tender gratitude for having felt something so profound, even if it could never be fully realized. Perhaps on quiet evenings, she stood at her window looking down at the Parisian street below, thinking of a young lawyer in New York who had loved her honorably, from a careful distance, for his entire life. Perhaps that knowledge that she had been so deeply loved, even in absence, was its own kind of treasure, its own form of fulfillment. Love, you see, is not always about possession. Sometimes it's about honoring the beloved enough to let them go, to want their happiness more than your own gratification, to protect them from scandal and suffering, even if it means accepting loneliness yourself, to love them so completely that you choose what's best for them, even when it breaks your heart. Newland and Ellen loved each other that way, selflessly, painfully, with a purity that might not have survived the messy reality of actually being together, of dealing with guilt and social ostracism and the daily erosion of passion into something more mundane. They kept their love clean by keeping it unrealized. And there is something beautiful in that, even as there is something heartbreaking. They gave each other the gift of a perfect love, untested and therefore unbroken. The Age of Innocence that Edith Wharton wrote about was not just about social innocence or sexual innocence. It was about the innocence of believing that doing the right thing would bring happiness. That honor and duty would be rewarded with peace and contentment. That sacrifice meant something, that nobility of spirit would somehow be recognized and validated. Newland learned, as we all must learn, that life doesn't work that way. Doing the right thing often means choosing pain. Honor sometimes demands loneliness. Duty can feel like imprisonment, a cage you've locked yourself in and thrown away the key. But he also learned that there is grace in acceptance. That a life lived with integrity, even if not with passion, has its own quiet dignity. That small pleasures, a child's first steps, a well-argued case in court, a perfect autumn afternoon, a good book on a rainy day, can accumulate into something like contentment, if not quite happiness. And most importantly, he learned that we are not entitled to everything we want. That maturity means accepting limitations, making peace with compromise, finding beauty in what is rather than forever mourning what might have been. There is wisdom in that acceptance. There is strength in it. The strength to keep going, to keep being kind, to keep doing your duty even when no reward is forthcoming. The strength to look at your life, flawed, compromised, less than you dreamed, and say, "This is what I have, this is what I chose, and I will make it mean something." Sleep now, knowing that every choice we make shapes us, but does not define us entirely. That love, even unfulfilled love, enriches life rather than diminishes it. That having felt deeply, even painfully, is better than never having felt at all. Let Newland's quiet strength rest in your dreams tonight. Let Ellen's brave honesty whisper comfort through the darkness. Let their bittersweet story remind you that we are all doing our best with impossible situations, all trying to be good while longing to be free, all navigating the eternal tension between what we want and what is right. Tomorrow is another day with its own choices and challenges and compromises. But tonight, rest in the knowledge that honor matters. That faithfulness, even when it costs us everything we desire, has value. That love expressed through restraint and sacrifice can be as profound as love expressed through passion and possession. And that sometimes, the deepest wisdom is knowing when to hold on and when to let go. When to climb the stairs and when to sit on the bench, content with memory, at peace with what was and what will never be. May you sleep as Newland finally slept in his later years, not with regret for the road not taken, but with gratitude for having walked the road he chose with dignity, with grace, with an unquiet heart that nonetheless beat with integrity until its very last. Good night, sweet dreams, and may you wake knowing that every life, even one of quiet sacrifice, matters, that every love, even unfulfilled, is real and true, that there is beauty always in choosing to be kind rather than cruel, faithful rather than faithless, honorable rather than selfish, even when the cost is your heart's deepest desire. Rest now, the story is told, the lights are dimmed. The Gilded Age has passed into memory, and with it Newland and Ellen, their love preserved forever in the moment before it could be realized or disappointed. And tomorrow, you will carry its quiet wisdom with you into whatever choices wait on the other side of sleep. Sleep well, sleep deeply, sleep peacefully. Until we meet again in another story, another world, another life where perhaps the rules are different and love is allowed to bloom without fear. Good night.